Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I noticed the kid before I noticed the swing moving. That's what made me stop. It was almost midnight, and the school grounds should have been dead quiet. I was halfway through my last round of the night, checking doors, shutting off lights, making sure the trash bins behind the cafeteria were locked. Same routine I'd done for almost 6 years at Lincoln Elementary. The air was cold and dry, the kind of early winter night where your breath comes out sharp. I'd left my jacket unzipped because I wasn't planning to be outside long. The floodlights around the parking lot cast these wide cones of pale yellow across the asphalt. Beyond that, the field stretched out into darkness, with only the faint glow of the distant street lamps touching the edges of the playground. That's when I saw the shape on the swings, just a single kid-sized silhouette, sitting perfectly still. The swing next to them rocked slightly in the wind, chains giving off a soft metallic creak. The one the kid sat on didn't move at all. I stopped dead at the edge of the field. The school was closed for winter break. No clubs, no aftercare, no sports teams. There shouldn't have been anybody out there, especially not a child. I told myself maybe one of the teachers had brought their kid by and they wandered off. But no cars were in the lot except mine, and the gate to the field was locked hours earlier. I cupped my hands around my mouth. Hey, you okay out here? Nothing. The kid didn't even look at me. Their head was tilted all the way back, staring straight up at the sky like they were watching something. I glanced up too, but all I saw were a few stars and the dim haze of town lights. I started walking toward the playground, crunching across the frost-hardened grass. My keys jingled on my belt with every step. I kept talking as I approached because something about the stillness felt wrong. You lost? You live nearby? It's a little late to be out. The kid raised one hand, not toward me, but upward, like they were reaching for something. I slowed down. Are you hurt? I reached the wood chip border of the playground. The smell of cold plastic and old mulch hit me. The metal bars of the jungle gym creaked softly in the wind. Then the kid whispered, voice thin and tight. They're coming for me. I stopped so fast my foot slid on the frost. What? Who's coming? Do you need help? The kid lowered their hand but didn't look away from the sky. I stepped onto the playground, wood chips crunching under my boots, and got close enough to see more details. Dark clothes, too thin for the temperature, hands resting lightly on the swing chains, and hair that hung straight down, unmoving, like the kid wasn't breathing hard at all. Hey, I said softly. Look at me. I can take you inside, okay? It's warm in there. Just tell me what's going on. The kid finally lowered their head, very slowly, as if they'd forgotten how gravity worked. And when their face aligned with mine, I saw their eyes. Black, not shadowed, not dark. Solid, glassy black, reflecting none of the field lights behind me. I took a step back without meaning to. The cold air burned in my throat. Okay, I said carefully. Let's just stay calm. You can come with me. We'll call someone. The kid didn't blink, didn't speak. Then the light swept across the field. It came from the left, moving in a perfectly straight line across the playground. A narrow beam of white, maybe 3 feet wide, glowing like a spotlight but with no visible source. No hum from a drone, no helicopter sound, no floodlights from the buildings. Just a beam sliding across the grass as smooth as a laser pointer. My shadow stretched long across the ground as the light passed over me, sharpening every detail like daylight. The kid whispered, "Too late." I whipped my head upward, hoping to see a plane, a searchlight, anything. But the sky was empty. Clear. No clouds. No movement. Nothing that could have produced a beam that bright. The light swept over the playground next. The swings lit up like they were under a pure white sun. The metal chains gleamed. The frost on the plastic seats sparkled. And the kid, gone. Not faded, not lifted, not blurred. Just gone. The swing hung still, perfectly straight, the seat cold and untouched. I took 2 shaky steps forward and grabbed the swing, half expecting it to still be warm. It was freezing, like no one had been sitting there at all. The beam of light continued moving across the field, reaching the far fence. Then it simply stopped. No dimming, no flicker. like it had hit an invisible wall. It vanished. The field went dark again except for the usual street lamps. I stood there breathing too fast, scanning the tree line, the shadows, the sky. Nothing moved. The silence felt thick. Even the wind had stopped. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded small. "Kid, you there?" No response. I checked behind the slide, the picnic tables, the equipment shed. I even shined my flashlight across the field. Nothing. I walked the perimeter twice, calling out until my throat hurt. If the kid had run, I would have seen footprints. If they'd hidden, I would have spotted movement. The frost was untouched, except for my own tracks. After 10 minutes, I went back inside the building, locking the door behind me. My hands shook when I turned the deadbolt. I sat in the break room trying to calm down, listening for anything. Footsteps, a knock, anything at all. Nothing happened. The rest of my shift, I kept replaying what I'd seen. The kid's eyes. Their voice. That beam of light with no origin. I didn't write an incident report. What would I even have written? At sunrise, I walked out to the playground again. The swing was still. Frost covered everything. Not a single disturbance in the wood chips, except where I'd stepped the night before. I checked the field too. No footprints. No marks from equipment or vehicles. Just empty winter grass stretching between chain-link fences. I didn't tell anyone on the morning shift. They'd have laughed. Or worse, they'd have believed me. I just went home, lay in bed, and stared at the ceiling until my alarm went off again for the next night's shift. Now, every time I walk past that playground after dark, I look at the swings. Sometimes they sway a little in the wind. Sometimes they don't move at all. But twice since that night, I've found the swing facing slightly crooked when the rest are lined up straight, like someone small sat there for a minute, watching the sky, then slipped away before I came outside. I always stand there for a moment, listening to the quiet, waiting to hear a whisper or see a beam of light cross the field again. It hasn't happened. Not yet. My phone's compass started going crazy about 15 minutes after I turned off the main highway. I was on one of those narrow country roads outside of Tulare, the kind where the fields go on forever, and the only lights are distant farmhouses or the occasional truck passing in the opposite direction. It was late, close to 1 a.m., and I was coming back from visiting a friend in Visalia. I don't know why I even had the compass open. I guess I was just checking if I'd missed a turn somewhere. At first, I thought the phone was glitching. The little red arrow spun all the way around, paused, then whipped back the other way like it was stuck on something. I tapped the screen twice. The arrow kept jittering, pointing in every direction except the actual one I was facing. I slowed down and held the phone up in front of me just to make sure I wasn't bumping it around. Still spinning. My signal bars were dead, not low, gone completely. That wasn't unusual for the area, but the compass thing threw me. I remember saying, "Okay, that's weird," out loud, and that's when I noticed something through the windshield. It was small at first, a bright point of light near the horizon, just above the tops of the distant orchards. I thought it was a plane, but it wasn't moving the way a plane should. It drifted sideways, not angled, sideways, parallel to the ground, slow and smooth, like someone sliding a coin across a table. I pulled off onto the dirt shoulder without really thinking. Dust rose around the car, lit by my headlights. The object was still there. It didn't blink or pulse, just a steady white glow, maybe the size of a bright star, but too low and too clear to be one. I turned off the radio to hear better, which was pointless because there was nothing to hear. Just the engine idling, the faint ticking from the cooling vents, and this strange quiet that felt heavier than any normal night out there. The light slid a few inches across the horizon, then stopped. For a moment, I genuinely thought it might be a drone. People film fields all the time. Maybe someone was checking irrigation or doing night mapping or whatever farmers do with drones now. But I'd never seen one move like that, smooth, controlled, with no noise at all. I opened the car door and stepped out. The cold hit me fast. There was a sharp breeze coming off the fields, carrying that dusty smell the Central Valley always has at night. I leaned against the door and watched the light. It started drifting again. Same sideways motion, slow as before. I tried to line it up with something in the distance, a tree, a fence, anything, to see how far away it might have been. It was hard to tell. It looked like it was miles out, but still too bright to be that far. I held up my phone again. The compass arrow spun even faster now, making full circles without pausing. I tried to film the light, but the camera wouldn't focus. The screen kept blurring in and out like I was shaking, even though I wasn't. Then the object stopped a second time. This time, it stayed still long enough for me to really look at it. The glow was white, but not like a bulb or LED. It didn't flare or bleed around the edges. The edges were sharp, defined, like the light belonged to a solid shape I couldn't see. I realized then that everything around me had gone quiet. Not quiet as in no cars or coyotes, quiet like the air itself wasn't moving anymore. The breeze had stopped. The insects had stopped. I couldn't hear anything except the soft hum of my engine. I shut the engine off. The silence got even heavier. I don't know how else to describe it. It was like someone pressed their hands over my ears, but without the pressure. The light jerked. Not much, just a tiny sharp movement upward. A jump, almost. But it was the first time it had moved in anything other than that slow slide. My chest tightened. I thought about getting back in the car, but something kept me watching. It slid sideways again, but this time faster. Then it slowed, then sped up. The motion didn't feel random, not exactly. More like it was following invisible lines. My compass arrow spun so fast the phone vibrated. I lowered it, and when I looked back at the horizon, the object wasn't where it had been. It was higher now. Not far, but noticeably. Maybe a few degrees. I blinked, and in that blink, it moved again. Not a jump this time, just a quick shift to the left, almost like it had been waiting for me to look away. Something about that made my stomach twist, like whatever it was didn't want its movement seen closely. I backed up toward my car door without turning around. The gravel crunched under my shoes. That tiny sound felt too loud in the dead air. Just before I got in, the light started drifting toward me. Not directly, more diagonally, like it was closing the distance but keeping low above the orchards. It didn't speed up or get erratic. It came in the same slow glide it had used before, like it had all the time in the world. I slid into the driver's seat and shut the door quietly, even though I knew that didn't matter. The object kept drifting closer. I watched it through the windshield, trying not to panic. My breathing got fast enough to fog the glass. I decided to start the car, even if it meant breaking the silence. The engine turned over normally. The light paused. I don't mean it stopped drifting. I mean it paused midair, like someone pressed a button that froze it in place. My headlights caught dust floating in the still air. The object didn't move an inch. I put the car in drive and eased forward. The object rose. Just a little, like it was adjusting. I pressed the gas harder. The tires spun a moment in the loose dirt before finding traction. I pulled back onto the road faster than I meant to. My hands were shaking so badly I almost veered into the grass on the other side. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The object was behind me now, still hovering in the same spot above the orchards. It didn't chase me. It didn't move. It just stayed there, perfectly still, like it was watching. My compass arrow finally stopped spinning. It pointed steadily north as if nothing had happened. I didn't look back again. I drove until I hit the first gas station on the edge of town. Only then did I let myself breathe normally. I parked under the bright canopy lights and checked the sky. Nothing. Just stars and a faint haze from the city. My phone had full signal again, compass working perfectly. I waited there for almost 20 minutes, half expecting that white light to drift over the fields toward the station, steady as ever. It didn't. On the rest of the drive home, I kept checking the mirrors, scanning the horizon, watching for any sideways drift or sudden shift of white against the dark. Nothing followed. Nothing reappeared. But the compass thing stuck with me more than the light did. I've used that road a dozen times since, and the compass has never acted like that again. It only happened in those exact minutes, on that exact stretch of road, right before I saw something drifting sideways through the sky, like it wasn't bound to the same rules everything else is. I don't leave the main highway at night anymore. There's no reason to risk driving past that spot again. I set up the trail camera because of the raccoon problem. That's it. Nothing exciting. My neighbor, Marcy, said she'd seen at least 3 of them climbing over my fence every night, and I kept finding my trash can knocked over in the morning. I bought a cheap motion-triggered camera online, strapped it to the big oak in my backyard, and figured I'd get a week's worth of blurry raccoon photos and maybe a skunk or two. That first night, the weather was weird. Warm for October, but with this heavy, wet feeling in the air, like it was going to storm even though the sky was clear. No wind, no bugs humming, just this thick quiet that made it feel later than it was. I went to bed around 11. Nothing special happened. No noises, no lights, no animals shrieking. I slept pretty deeply, actually. I didn't wake up until my alarm went off. The only strange thing I noticed that morning was that my porch light was off, even though it's on a timer. I checked the switch and it was still set correctly. I figured the bulb died, though I couldn't remember how old it was. It wasn't until after work that I remembered the camera. I expected maybe 20 photos, tops, maybe a raccoon waddling around or a neighborhood cat. Instead, when I plugged the SD card into my laptop, the first thing I saw was that the camera had taken 137 photos in one night. Most were exactly what you'd expect. Empty backyard, one shot of a possum, a couple of leaves close to the lens, my fence glowing in infrared. But then I scrolled down. Every shot between 2 and 2:03 a.m. was totally white. Not overexposed, not washed out by the flash, just white. A completely uniform blank image, like someone had opened Photoshop and filled the canvas with pure white. I thought the camera glitched, so I flipped through them quickly. White, white, white. 90 plus identical white frames. I checked the timestamps. The first white photo was 2:11. The last was 2:03:04. I stared at them long enough that my eyes started to hurt. The camera didn't usually fire more than once every 4 or 5 seconds because of the reset time, but these were spaced 1 to 2 seconds apart, like something kept triggering it over and over, non-stop. I put the SD card back in the camera and took a test shot in my kitchen. The picture came out fine. I tried shining a flashlight directly into the lens. The result was still a normal photo, a bright flare in a dark frame, but not a blank white image. That's when I started feeling uneasy. I went outside to check the spot. The grass looked normal. The oak tree looked normal. Nothing burned, nothing flattened, no signs that anything had even stepped there. The camera mount was still tight. The settings were the same. I told myself maybe a spider built a web on the lens and the flash reflected off it. But when I ran my thumb over the lens, there was nothing there. No thread, no smudge, nothing sticky. The next night, I reset the camera and put it back in the same place. I woke up once around 1:45 a.m. for no real reason. My house was quiet, too quiet. I'm used to hearing the fridge or the pipes or something. This time there was nothing. The air felt as heavy as the night before. I eventually drifted off again. When I checked the photos later that day, the same thing had happened. 2:02 to 2:05 a.m. this time. Every picture in that window, pure white. I didn't like how consistent it was. Same narrow time frame, same type of blank image. And once again, the shots fired much faster than the camera usually allowed. That evening, I tried a little experiment. I went outside at 1:50 a.m. and sat in a chair near the tree. I didn't turn on any lights. I just sat there with a blanket around my shoulders, listening. For the first 10 minutes, nothing happened. Then, around 2 exactly, I noticed the air shift. Not wind, just a kind of pressure change, like when a storm rolls in. My ears popped. The tree leaves around me didn't move, the grass didn't sway, but the air felt heavier, thicker, like I was underwater. I didn't hear the camera take a picture. Usually the shutter makes a faint clicking sound. This time, it was silent, or maybe I couldn't hear it through that weird pressure feeling. Then something changed with the light. Not bright, not like a flashlight or car headlights, but the darkness around me got thin. That's the best word I have. The shadows softened. The area around the tree felt washed out, like someone had turned down the contrast on reality. I don't know how else to explain it. It lasted maybe 20 seconds. Then, as quickly as it came on, it stopped. Everything snapped back. The air felt normal. The shadows looked sharp again. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The photos the next morning were the same. White from 2 to 2:03 a.m. I tried moving the camera the following night. I strapped it to the fence instead, angled so it pointed toward the house. I wanted to see if the light was coming from outside the yard. That night, I stayed inside, watching from the kitchen window. I kept the room dark so I could see clearly into the yard. Around 2 a.m., the same muted shift happened. The air felt wrong again, thick and quiet. I watched the yard, waiting to see some actual light source or movement. Nothing. No glow, no figure, no animal. Just the same flattened, washed-out quality I'd felt when I'd been outside. The next batch of photos were blank again. I was starting to get nervous. Not panicked, just this persistent sense that something was coming into my yard, or around it, or through it, every night at the same time. Not an animal, not a neighbor's light, something else. On the fifth night, I took a different approach. I set up my old camcorder in the window, aimed at the yard. I left the trail camera on the fence too, figuring I'd compare the footage. At 1:57 a.m., I hit record on the camcorder and let it run. When the air pressure changed, I felt it from inside. My ears popped again. The room dimmed slightly, like a cloud passed in front of the moon, except there was no moon that night. The camcorder didn't pick up any obvious light. The image just got slightly flatter, like someone put a translucent sheet over the lens. The trail camera didn't click. I watched it. I should have heard something. But once again, nothing. The next morning, the SD card had 12 white photos, all between 2 and 2:02 a.m. The camcorder footage showed nothing but a slight haze during those minutes. I thought about telling someone, Marcy, or my brother Daniel, or even posting the photos online, but I knew what it would sound like. I barely understood it myself, and I didn't have anything concrete, just white pictures and some footage where the yard looked a little blurry. I left the camera up for another week. Every single night between 1:58 and 2:05, I got blank frames. The window of time shifted slightly but stayed centered around 2 a.m. On the ninth night, something new happened. I woke up at exactly 2:01 a.m. I didn't hear anything, but my eyes opened like someone had whispered my name. I sat up in bed and felt the pressure change immediately. My ears popped so hard it almost hurt. Then, a faint brightness seeped through my curtains. Not enough to cast shadows, just enough to lighten the room a shade. A soft, uniform glow. I got out of bed and walked to the window. I pulled the curtain back an inch. My backyard was white. Not bright, not glowing. Just white, like it was filled with fog, except the air wasn't moving and nothing swirled. It wasn't fog, it wasn't light. It was this flat, pale presence sitting over everything. The oak, the fence, the grass, all washed in the same blank color. I let the curtain fall back into place. The glow faded. The pressure lifted. My ears popped again, this time back to normal. I didn't check the trail camera until later that afternoon. I already knew what would be there. Pure white from 2 to 2:03. The camera still works. I still have it. I haven't put it up again since that night. I don't think I want to know whether it's still happening, but sometimes around 2 in the morning, I'll wake up for no reason at all, and the house feels heavy, and the air feels still, and I keep my eyes closed because I don't want to see whether the room has gone a shade too bright. I set up camp later than I meant to. I'd driven up to Lake Silverbourne after work, hoping to squeeze in one quiet night alone before the weekend crowds showed up. It was early September in northern Minnesota. Cool enough that the bugs weren't bad, warm enough that I could get away with a thin jacket. By the time I got my little gray tent staked down near the shoreline, the sun had already dipped behind the trees, leaving this hazy blue light that faded fast. The lake was calm, almost flat. Not perfectly still, but close. Every sound carried, a loon somewhere on the far side, the soft clinking of my canoe nudging the rocks, an occasional splash from fish hitting the surface. I remember thinking it felt like the air was holding its breath. I got a small fire going. Nothing big, just enough to warm my hands. Ate a peanut butter sandwich because I was too tired to cook anything real. My phone had barely any signal, which I expected, so I turned it off and tossed it into the tent. By the time real darkness set in, fog had started rolling in from the middle of the lake. Not thick at first, just low wisps that skimmed the water. It made the moon look smeared, like someone had wiped a thumb across it. I tried listening to a podcast, but shut it off after a few minutes. The voices felt too loud in the quiet, like they didn't belong out there. Around 10, I decided to walk down to the edge of the water. I brought a small flashlight, but didn't turn it on right away. The fog was heavier by then, a pale layer that spread out across the lake and crept toward shore. I could still see maybe 30 or 40 feet ahead, but everything beyond that was swallowed up in gray. That's when I noticed the ripples. They were way out, far beyond where someone could swim to without a canoe. But I hadn't heard anyone else pull up or paddle by. And these ripples weren't random either. They looked intentional, like something was pushing just under the surface in a slow, steady line. I knelt down, trying to hear anything over the gentle lap of water on the rocks. Nothing. No engine. No splashing. Just that weird expanding circle of movement far from shore. I stood there for maybe a full minute before something changed. The ripples stopped, not faded, not drifted away, just stopped. Like whatever had been moving suddenly froze in place. I clicked on my flashlight then, even though the narrow beam didn't reach anywhere near the disturbance. All it did was light up the fog in front of me, turning it into this glowing white screen. I felt stupid standing there pointing a cheap flashlight into nothing, but I couldn't shake the instinct that something was out there. The ripples started again, faster this time, closer. I stepped back without meaning to. My heel hit a rock and almost rolled my ankle. The water stayed dark, but those ripples were definitely heading toward my side of the lake. I killed the flashlight. It only made the fog brighter and my own reflection harder to see. The ripples came to a stop about 100 feet out, maybe more. Hard to tell in that fog. Then something rose. At first I thought it was a big fish surfacing, maybe a sturgeon. But it wasn't the right shape, and it didn't break the surface with any sound. The water just bulged upward, smooth and glassy, forming a dome that lifted an inch at a time. Then the shape cleared the surface completely. A sphere, pale, almost white, but not glowing. More like it was made of something that caught the little moonlight there was and softened it. Maybe the size of a basketball, maybe bigger. Hard to tell with the distance and the fog. It didn't drip when it came out of the water. It didn't rotate or tilt or bob around like something fighting gravity. It just rose. I held my breath without noticing. My hands felt numb. For a second, I wondered if this was some weird fog reflection or a trick of the moon. But the ripples spread out from beneath the sphere in a perfect circle. I could see that clearly. Something had definitely lifted out of the lake. It kept rising until it hovered about 6 or 7 feet above the water. I waited for a sound. Any sound. A buzz, a hum, even a splash. Nothing. Just silence and that sphere hanging there like someone had paused time. My mind scrambled for explanations. A balloon? A drone? Some weather instrument? But balloons don't rise in dead straight lines like that. They don't move without drifting. And drones make noise, even the quiet ones. The fog thickened around it, swirling a little like it was reacting. I couldn't see the far shore anymore. The sphere looked like the only solid thing in the world. Then, and I still don't understand how fast this happened, the sphere shot upward. No acceleration, no buildup, just gone. 1 second it was hovering above the water, the next it was a pale blur streaking straight up into the fog. Not angled, not drifting sideways. Straight up like it had been yanked by an invisible wire. I actually took a step back and almost tripped over my own fire pit. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it behind my eyes. When I looked at the lake again, the fog had already collapsed back down, rolling in thick and low. The ripples spread outward and faded, leaving nothing but still water. Within maybe 20 seconds, there was no sign that anything had been there. I stayed frozen until the cold finally made my teeth start chattering. Back at the fire, I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it. Fog does weird things with light. Eyes play tricks when you're tired. But I kept replaying it in my head, and the part that always stuck wasn't the sphere itself. It was the water. Water doesn't rise like that. Not in perfect silence, not without breaking or dripping. I poured out the rest of my water bottle onto the fire and zipped myself inside the tent. I didn't sleep. Not really. I just lay there listening, waiting for any sound from the lake. A splash, a ripple, anything. Instead, the fog scraped quietly along the nylon walls, making this soft, gritty noise like sand shifting in a jar. Every so often, the air pressure in the tent felt different, like something outside had moved past it and displaced the atmosphere. Around 3 in the morning, I noticed my phone screen light up even though I hadn't turned it on. It booted up on its own, showed the lock screen for a second, then went dark. No notifications, no battery warning, nothing. I didn't dare reach for it. By dawn, the fog had burned off enough to see the lake again. Perfectly calm, no marks on the shore, no tracks, no sign of anything. I packed up without eating, barely even sipped the coffee I made. The whole time I kept glancing at the water, half expecting those ripples to start again. They didn't. When I got back home and charged my phone, it turned on like normal. No record of the reboot. No weird glitches, nothing strange in my photos or videos, not that I took any. But that image, the sphere rising out of the lake without a single sound, stayed burned into my mind in a way that didn't feel like imagination. I haven't gone back to Silverbourne since, and every time I see fog rolling across a lake on my drives now, I look away. I don't want to know if something's moving out there again, or if it's already watching from under the surface. The row of lights first appeared while I was kicking my shoes off at the edge of Sandbridge Beach, the sand still holding on to the heat from the day. It was just past dusk, that awkward time when the sky wasn't fully dark yet, but the horizon had already swallowed the sun. The air smelled like salt and damp seaweed. It had been a warm day, but a cool breeze rolled in off the water and kept brushing across my arms. I hadn't planned on staying long. I'd only come down after dropping off my friend Maria at her apartment. She worked doubles most weekends and begged me to bring her leftover pasta, so I made the drive out to the coast after my shift at the hardware store. By the time I got back in my car, I just didn't feel like heading straight home. So I parked and walked out onto the beach with my phone in my pocket and my head still buzzing from the day. That was when I noticed the lights. At first, I thought they were buoys. Small, evenly spaced dots glowing faint amber, far out over the water. There were maybe 7 or 8 of them, lined up in a gentle curve, too symmetrical to feel natural, but not blinking like regular navigation markers. I stood there for a minute, hands shoved into my hoodie, watching. The water itself looked normal. A few little waves folded towards shore, leaving lines of foam that fizzled and slid back. The lights didn't move. They didn't rock with the water either. I walked closer to the shoreline so the wet sand soaked into my socks. The lights stayed the same distance out, hovering just above the surface, faint but clear. A couple passed further down the beach with a dog, and I glanced at them to see if they noticed. They kept moving, laughing, leash tugging, no reaction. "Okay," I murmured, mostly to myself. Another minute passed. Then one of the lights dipped slightly, almost like it had lost power. It sank slowly down until it slipped under the surface without rippling the water at all. No splash, no distortion, just gone. I felt my chest tighten a bit. Then the next light did the same thing. Slow descent, gone. One by one, the lights sank straight down like they were being lowered on invisible strings. Each time, the surface remained strangely calm. No waves, no foam, nothing to mark that anything had even passed through. By the time the 5th light disappeared, I was breathing shallow and slow, trying not to feel ridiculous standing there staring at the ocean like a statue. I checked my phone just to make sure it hadn't glitched my vision somehow. No messages. No alerts. Battery fine. When I looked back up, 2 lights remained. They sat there in the quiet, soft glow threading through the dark water. A gentle hum drifted through the air for just a second, almost like sound vibrating through a faraway structure underwater. Then those 2 dipped as well. Straight down. Silent. The ocean went dark again. I stayed frozen for a few more moments, trying to picture boats or underwater rigs or anything that made sense. My mind kept looping back to how evenly spaced they were, how precise the sinking looked. A cold shiver rolled down my neck, even though the night still felt warm. I took a cautious step back up the beach, then another. Something about the quiet didn't feel normal anymore. No distant engines. No gulls, just the soft hush of the tide. Behind me, the dunes stirred slightly as the breeze shifted. I turned my head slowly, expecting maybe someone standing there watching the same thing. No one. Just sandgrass swaying and the faint glow of parking lot lights 100 yards away. I glanced back at the water once more. Nothing, just black waves folding in on themselves. I told myself it was probably fishing equipment or some weird reflection. I forced a small laugh, though it sounded shaky even to me. As I walked back up toward my car, my phone buzzed, making me flinch. A missed call from my coworker Trent. Timestamp said 3 minutes ago. I hadn't heard it ring. I slid into the driver's seat and locked the doors without thinking. The car interior felt too small, like the air inside had thickened. I glanced toward the ocean through the windshield, still nothing visible. When I turned the ignition, the radio crackled faint static before settling into silence. I never kept it on that station. I reached to change it and it snapped back to normal music. The drive home felt longer than usual, the dark coastline road curling through pockets of shadow. A couple times I thought I saw pale glimmers over the water out of the corner of my eye, but when I looked straight on, there was only darkness. Back at my apartment, I stood on the balcony for a while with the sea air still faint on my clothes. The horizon looked flat and empty, like nothing had ever been there. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I kept picturing those lights lowering into the water, like something deliberately retreating from sight. Not fleeing, just disappearing, one calm movement at a time. And every time I closed my eyes, I could hear that soft hum again, somewhere deep and distant, like it had been waiting for me to stop watching. The alert chimed on my phone at 2:41 a.m., sharp enough to drag me halfway out of sleep. I hadn't set any alarms. I squinted at the screen and saw the usual notification from my security app. Movement detected. Front yard camera. I frowned and rolled onto my side, thumb already tapping the notification. The house was quiet. No dog barking, no footsteps outside, just the low hum of the fridge through the wall. The video loaded slow, buffering on my spotty Wi-Fi. When it finally played, all I saw was the front of my yard, dim and gray under the porch light, and then a sudden wash of pure white brightness that swallowed the whole frame for less than a second. The camera returned to normal right after. Empty yard, still bushes, no motion, no figure, no shadow, no car, just that light. My name is Maribel Torres. I lived alone in a small rental on the edge of Gallup, New Mexico, the kind of place with gravel instead of a lawn and more sky than street. I worked early mornings, so I usually slept pretty hard. My cameras didn't trigger often, and when they did, it was almost always a stray cat or the wind tossing the sagebrush around. This was different. I replayed the clip 3 times, watching the timestamp in the corner. 2:41 a.m. Nothing leading up to it. No gradual fade. Just light, like someone had taken a flash photo of my house from right up close, except there was no one there. I slipped out of bed and padded to the front window. I didn't pull the curtain aside right away. I just stood there, listening. No engines, no voices, no crunch of boots on gravel. I finally peered out and scanned the yard. Everything looked normal. Gate still closed. Old Volkswagen across the street parked the same way it always was. No lingering glow, no drifting light. I told myself it was a bug, maybe a glare glitch, and went back to bed. But sleep didn't come back easy. Every faint noise outside made me tense. Around 3:10, the alert chimed again. Movement detected. My heart jumped so hard it hurt. I opened the app immediately. Again, the same thing. The yard, still and quiet, then a bright flare that washed over everything and vanished. Half a second. Gone. I checked the back camera. Nothing. Side yard. Nothing. Only the front. I pulled on a hoodie and padded down the hall, keeping the lights off as if that somehow made me safer. I opened the front door just a crack and peered out through the screen. The air smelled dry and dusty, like it always did at night out there. Not a single light moved beyond my porch. Then I noticed something else. The porch light looked dimmer than usual. It still worked, but the glow felt weak, like it had been drained slightly. I stepped out onto the wooden boards and looked up. The sky was clear. No clouds, no moon that night, just scattered stars and endless black above the desert. Nothing I could point at. Nothing that matched that blinding brightness from the footage. At 3:33, the phone signaled again. This time I was already awake, sitting on the couch with my knees pulled to my chest. I opened the clip and watched closely. Normal yard, gravel, fence, porch support beam, white blast. But this time, in between the brightness, I swore I saw a faint curve at the edge of the frame, as if something rounded had passed just beyond the camera's view. It didn't look solid, more like a distortion where the light bent strangely. My throat went dry. I checked the clock. 3:33 a.m. That's when my ceiling fan slowed for no reason, one long drag like the air had thickened, then returned to its normal speed. I tried calling my friend Elena just to hear another voice, but she didn't answer. I didn't leave a voicemail. I didn't want to sound ridiculous. The house felt tighter somehow, like the walls were pressing in just a little. At 4:02, the alert didn't come through, but my porch light flickered once. Not fully off, just a quick dip and back. I stood again by the front window, hands resting against the cold glass, and stared out into the dark. That's when the light came without any camera alert. A soft glow crept across the yard, starting near the fence line and washing slowly toward the house like a wave. Not as blinding as before, more muted, pale but steady. It didn't pulse, it didn't jitter, just slid quietly over the gravel. The shade of it made everything look colorless, drained. I held my breath, afraid to move, afraid that any sound might make it worse. As the glow reached the porch, my phone vibrated again. Movement detected. I glanced down at the screen and watched the live view this time instead of the recording. The camera struggled for half a second with the exposure, then showed only a white field where the yard should have been. No sound, no wind, no visible source. My heart thudded so hard I felt it in my ears. The light lingered longer than before. 2 seconds, 3. Then it thinned, pulling away like fog reverse flowing until my yard returned to normal. Dark, empty, silent. I didn't sleep after that. Morning came dry and hazy, pink light spilling over the horizon, and everything looked painfully normal. The gravel was undisturbed. My plants were fine. No strange marks on the wood, no burnt smell in the air. I checked all the recordings again over coffee. The clips existed, timestamps exact, each one the same, a brief flood of light that gave nothing away. I went to work like usual, but I kept glancing at my phone, expecting another alert even in broad daylight. Nothing came. That evening around 8, my neighbor Luis knocked on my door. He lived 2 houses down and kept chickens, always relaxed, always barefoot. "Did you mess with your porch light last night?" he asked casually. I stared at him. "What?" "It kept getting weird," he said. "Kept going dim and bright. Thought maybe you had one of those motion things installed." I shook my head slowly. "No," he shrugged, not pressing it. "Probably the wiring." He walked off, wave lazy, like it was nothing at all. The next night stayed quiet. No alerts, no flickers, no unexplained glow. But when I scrolled through my camera history before bed, I noticed something new. At 2:41 a.m., between frames of darkness before the first light burst, there was a shape barely visible at the edge of the yard. Just a faint blur against the fence, like something tall had been standing there too close to the camera to focus. It didn't appear in the wide brightness, only in the moment, right before. I stared at the still frame until my eyes ached. Nothing else ever happened after that. No more alerts, no more flashes. But I started sleeping with my curtains closed and my phone face down on the nightstand. And sometimes when the house settled into quiet, I caught myself staring at the front door, feeling like the yard was watching me back. The radio cut to static right as my tires hit the start of the bridge, a sharp hiss that swallowed the soft country song I'd been half listening to. I tapped the volume knob out of habit, thinking I just drifted out of range again, but the static flattened into a low, steady hum. Not music, not talking, just one long, even tone. It was close to midnight, and I was crossing the old Callahan Bridge outside of Riverton, the one that stretched over Blackwater Creek and the marsh beyond it. There were no streetlights on that stretch, just my headlights and the occasional reflective marker on the guardrail. The night felt heavy and damp, the kind where the air stuck to your skin. It had rained earlier in the evening, and the boards of the bridge still looked dark and wet. I glanced down at the radio, expecting it to switch back like it usually did. It stayed on that hum, is almost like someone was holding a note somewhere very far away. "What are you doing?" I muttered, leaning forward and twisting the dial. The hum didn't change. AM, FM, auxiliary, all the same low vibration. Then, I looked over the passenger window. Below the bridge, the creek was barely visible, just a flat stretch of black water with faint ripples catching the headlights. That's when I noticed the glow. It wasn't bright, just a soft pale shape sliding under the surface, like someone had drawn a streak of light and erased it mid-motion. It moved slow and smooth, not splashing or churning, just drifting along beneath the water in a way that didn't look right. I eased my foot off the gas without really thinking, watching it pass under my side of the bridge. The hum on the radio didn't change, but I could feel it now, not just hear it, a faint vibration in my fingertips on the steering wheel. The shape glowed a little brighter for maybe 2 seconds. Long, faded at the edges. I couldn't tell what it was, only that it moved with a purpose that felt wrong for the creek. Then it dimmed and slipped into darkness. The moment it vanished, the hum cut out and the radio popped back to the country song, right where it had left off. No static, no warning, just normal sound again. I didn't touch anything. I drove the rest of the bridge in silence, had music still playing but feeling wrong now, like background noise in a place that shouldn't have any. When I finally reached the other side, I pulled over onto the gravel shoulder and turned the engine off. The night felt too quiet. Even the crickets seemed distant. I sat there staring back at the bridge, half expecting the glow to show again, but the water looked plain and dark. My phone buzzed. A message from my cousin Lacey asking if I'd made it home yet. I told her I was fine, just driving slow. I didn't mention the bridge. I didn't really know how to explain it without sounding off. After a few minutes, I started the car again and headed home, trying to shake the feeling that something had passed too close to me without touching. The next morning, I woke up thinking maybe I'd imagined it. Late night, tired eyes, wet roads, that was the easiest answer. Still, memory of that hum and the quiet glow wouldn't leave me alone. So around noon, I drove back out to the bridge. In daylight, it looked normal. Rusted metal supports, tired wooden planks, brown water drifting lazily underneath. I stood at the rail for a while, scanning the surface. No light, no motion beyond the slow current. I leaned slightly over, peering down, and caught a faint shimmer far below, like a reflection that didn't match the sun. It moved for a split second and then vanished again, as if it had only been there when I wasn't trying to see it. I stepped back, heart tapping a little faster than it should have. Later that night, it happened again. I found myself on the bridge around the same time, even though I didn't remember choosing that road. The sky was darker this time, clouds hiding every star. The air felt cooler, heavier. My tires rolled over the same wet boards I remembered from the night before. The radio stayed silent for most of the drive, but as soon as I reached the center of the bridge, the hum returned. Clearer this time. Deeper. It filled the inside of the car so completely it felt like a layer pressing down. I didn't touch anything. I just stared straight ahead, pulse ticking behind my ears. This time, the glow appeared on the opposite side, closer to the surface. A wider shape now, fainter around the edges, but undeniably there. It glided slow as if it were tracing the length of the bridge itself. I watched it move alongside me, matching my speed as I crept forward without realizing I'd slowed again. The sense of being watched crept in slowly, like a cold line down my back. Not from above, not from the road, from the water. The glow pulsed once, soft and steady, then dipped lower and disappeared again, leaving the surface untouched. No ripples, no sound. The radio went quiet immediately after. I exhaled and kept driving until I reached the other side, as hands tight on the wheel. I made it home and sat in my driveway for a long time, just listening to the normal night sounds. Frogs, wind through the trees, a distant dog barking. Everything felt normal again, but my skin still buzzed faintly like the hum left behind a memory of itself. I slept lightly, waking a few times to check if I could hear anything outside. Only silence. Over the next few days, I avoided that bridge without intentionally deciding to. I took longer routes, drove out of my way just to not pass over it. Every time my radio crackled a little or the road went quiet, my stomach tightened. A week later, I had no choice but to cross it again. A detour forced me that way after a delivery run, and the sky had turned overcast early, pressing low and gray. The air smelled like rain. As I approached the bridge, the radio didn't hum. No static, just ordinary talk show voices. I almost felt ridiculous for feeling anxious. Halfway across, the voices twisted suddenly into faint white noise. Then that same steady tone seeped through low and slow. I didn't look down right away. When I finally did, the water was calm, dark, empty. No glow this time, no shape, just shadow. But the hum stayed, strong and even, filling the car until I reached the far end. Then it vanished as soon as my tires rolled onto dry pavement. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw a faint glimmer under the bridge, barely visible, like a distant reflection fading into nothing. I kept driving. I didn't stop. And when I reached home, I locked the door and stood in the quiet for a while, listening to the normal sounds of my house. The creek stayed quiet after that, but every time my radio dropped into static for even a second, I felt that low hum echo in my chest, like the water hadn't quite let go of me yet. I woke up to the sound of gravel shifting just outside my tent. At first I thought I'd dreamed it, the way loose stones grind when someone takes a slow step. But then it happened again, a short scrape, then silence. I lay still, listening, trying to figure out if it was a raccoon or just the ground settling. The night had been quiet before that. No wind, no insects, just the usual distant trees creaking and the faint rush of a creek somewhere down the slope. I'd set up camp a few miles into a trail in the Ochoco National Forest. It was a solo trip, just me and my gear, trying to clear my head after a rough work week. My name's Elliot Ramirez, and I wasn't the type to spook easy, but something about that sound felt deliberate. Another scrape came, closer this time. I unzipped the tent a few inches and peeked out. A soft cone of white light hung over the center of my campsite. Not a flashlight beam, not a car headlight. It was suspended in the air maybe 10 feet above the ground, wide at the base, narrowing up into darkness I couldn't see. The light didn't cast sharp shadows, it just glowed gently, like it was made of fog and brightness mixed together. I stared at it, not breathing, waiting for it to move or flicker, but it stayed perfectly still. Then, after maybe 3 or 4 seconds, it faded. No snapping off, just dimmer and dimmer until it blended into the night. The trees closed back around the darkness like nothing had been there. I stepped out of the tent slowly, boots crunching over the same gravel that had made the noise. The air felt heavier than before, warmer too, even though the night had been cool when I'd gone to sleep. I looked around, scanning for someone with a flashlight, but the trail and clearing were empty. My headlamp beam felt weak compared to whatever that had been. I walked to where the light had been, crouched down and ran my hand over the ground. No marks, no footprints. The gravel looked undisturbed, except for the tracks I'd just made. Behind me, the tent fabric rustled slightly, even though there was still no breeze. I checked my phone. No service, which wasn't unusual out here. The time read 2:14 a.m. I frowned. I could have sworn it had been around 1:50 when I'd last checked before falling asleep, but maybe I was misremembering. Another faint sound came from the tree line to my right. Not an animal, more like someone shifting weight from one foot to the other. I turned the headlamp and called out, "Hello?" My voice sounded thin in the open air. No answer. I stood there longer than I meant to, waiting for something else to happen. Instead, everything went still again. Too still, like the forest was holding its breath. I went back into the tent, zipped it halfway, and sat on my sleeping pad with my knees pulled up. My heart was still thudding, slow and heavy. I tried to tell myself it had been some weird natural thing, maybe reflected light from a distant road or drone, but it hadn't moved like any of that. Another scrape of gravel sounded, but closer to the tent now. I froze. The sound moved along the edge of the campsite, a slow, careful path, as if something was circling. I could hear it, but there was no shadow, no outline through the tent fabric. Then the scraping stopped altogether. A low hum filled the air for a second or two, so faint I almost thought it was my own ears ringing. It crept up and then disappeared. My phone buzzed suddenly in my hand, making me flinch. No notification, just the vibration as if it had tried and failed to connect. I opened the tent again and stepped out, scanning harder this time. The forest was dark, but not pitch black. A thin veil of mist hung between the trunks, catching the beam of my headlamp in soft streaks. I walked toward the trees a few steps, feeling uneasy, but not wanting to just sit there doing nothing. That's when the light came back. Not above the campsite this time, but a little deeper between the trees. Another cone, smaller, angled slightly, pointing toward the ground as if marking a spot. It didn't pulse or flash. It just hovered, quietly, wrong in a way I couldn't explain. I took a few slow steps toward it, and it dimmed, like it was pulling away from me. I stopped. It settled again, steady. My breath fogged in front of my face. I raised my phone and tried to record. The screen showed only darkness, with a blurry white smear where the light should have been. After a second, the camera froze and kicked back to the home screen. I looked up, and the light had vanished again. This time, the air felt colder, and the silence felt heavier, pressing down on me. I turned in a slow circle, trying to make sense of where it could have gone. There was no path it could have taken without me seeing it move. Behind me, the gravel shifted one more time, sharp, close. I spun around, heart in my throat, but nothing stood there. Just the open clearing and my small tent, faintly outlined. That was when my watch caught my eye. The digital display read 2:41 a.m. I stared at it, trying to piece together the timeline. I couldn't remember walking around for nearly half an hour. It felt like maybe 5 or 10 minutes since I first saw the light. I climbed back into the tent, zipped it fully, and lay down with my boots still on, staring at the ceiling. Every sound made me tense. Every slight touch of fabric felt too loud. I didn't sleep, not really. I just drifted in and out of shallow half-rest, waiting for something else to happen. It didn't. By the time the sky started to lighten to a dull gray blue, the forest noise slowly returned. Birds, distant wind, regular life. The air felt normal again. I crawled out and looked around in the pale early morning. The campsite looked exactly as I'd left it. No strange marks, no burned earth, nothing out of place, except my cooler. It sat a few feet closer to the fire ring than where I clearly remembered putting it the night before. I stood there a long time staring at it, then packed up without eating. My hands worked on autopilot, rolling up the tent, stuffing gear into my pack, checking the straps over and over. The hike back to the car felt twice as long. Every time the path curved or dipped behind trees, I expected to see that faint light again, hovering somewhere just out of reach. It never appeared. When I reached the trailhead, my car was just where I'd left it. No damage. No signs of anyone else having been there. The radio came on like normal. The engine started without hesitation. The drive home felt unreal, like everything was slightly off, but trying to pretend it wasn't. When I pulled into my driveway, the sun was already up. My neighbor's sprinklers ticked softly across the lawn. Everything looked ordinary again. Inside, I dropped my pack by the door and stood there in silence for a moment, listening to the hum of the fridge and the faint creak of the house settling. I glanced down at my boots. Tiny bits of pale gravel were wedged into the soles, a different kind than the trail usually had. Smooth, almost polished. I brushed them away and went to take a shower, but even with the hot water running over me, my mind kept replaying the quiet cone of white light hanging over that dark campsite, as if it had never meant for me to really see it at all. The night went quiet in a way that didn't make sense somewhere around the third block. I'd left Theo's apartment a little after midnight, pulling my jacket tighter as I headed down Delancey toward my place on the edge of River Point. It had been muggy all day, the kind of late September humidity that stuck to your skin even after the sun dropped. A light mist hung in the air, not quite rain, just enough to make the street lamps blur softly around their edges. At first, everything felt normal. Distant traffic, a siren way off somewhere near the interstate, someone laughing outside a bar a few streets over, the usual city noise that never fully shut off. Then, halfway past the old dry cleaner and the closed nail salon, the sound just thinned. It didn't stop completely. It just dulled, like someone had pressed a layer of cotton over the entire block. Footsteps still echoed, but softer than they should have been. The hum of traffic faded until it sounded like it was miles away instead of just a few roads over. I slowed down, glancing around. Streetlights stayed on. A cat darted across an alley. The mist swirled low near the curb. Everything looked the same, but the world felt muffled. I clapped my hands once out of instinct. The sound came out strangely flat, like the air swallowed it halfway. "Okay," I muttered, trying to sound normal even though my stomach tightened. I kept walking. That's when I noticed the hum. It came from above, somewhere high and vague, not directional. Just a low, steady vibration that felt like it lived in the air itself. It wasn't loud. It wasn't sharp. It just followed, matching the rhythm of my steps without any obvious source. I looked up at the overcast sky. I didn't see anything. Just pale clouds glowing dull orange from the city lights. The hum stayed with me. I passed the boarded-up hardware store and the chain-link fence that bordered the old rail spur, and the sound didn't shift. It didn't grow louder or quieter. It just remained, barely noticeable, unless I paid attention, which, of course, I was now doing. I told myself it was probably some nearby transformer or distant construction noise bouncing weirdly off the humidity. That explanation didn't fully land, but it was the only one I had. Another block went by. The muted silence held. No car passed, no voices drifted from open windows. Even the wind felt paused. A bead of sweat rolled down my neck despite the cooler night air. I glanced back over my shoulder. The street behind looked empty and normal, lit by the same hazy lamps, but even the faint clatter of loose trash blowing along the curb had vanished. The hum continued. My phone buzzed softly in my pocket, and the vibration felt too sharp in the quiet, like it cut through the thick air. I pulled it out without slowing. A text from Mira asking if I'd made it home yet. Almost, I typed, then stuck the phone back away. The moment my hand left my pocket, the hum deepened slightly. Not louder, just closer. My pace picked up without me thinking about it. The muffled world didn't change. It still felt like the city's volume had been turned down a notch and left there deliberately. Halfway down the next block, I noticed something else. Streetlights ahead started to look dimmer, not flickering, just softer, like the mist had thickened directly under them, swallowing more light than before. The hum hovered somewhere above my head. I tilted my face up again. The clouds were low and slow-moving. Nothing was visible that should have produced sound like that. No helicopters, no blimps, no planes, just heavy sky. My skin prickled. The silence stretched on, uncomfortable and heavy. I crossed the intersection near Larkin Street and felt that same strange pressure settle deeper into my chest, like the air was slightly compressing around me. I could still hear my own breathing, but even that sounded distant. The hum followed me through the intersection. I glanced up at the windows of the apartment building to my left. Most were dark. One glowed faintly blue from a TV. No one else stood outside. No cars rolled past. It felt like the entire block belonged only to me and whatever that sound came from. "Come on," I muttered, trying to shake the nervous edge creeping into my voice. That was when the hum briefly shifted. It dipped lower for just a second, almost dropping out completely, then rose again, slightly faster, like something adjusting its position above me. I stopped walking. The hum stayed. The city remained eerily muted. I forced myself to take a few more steps, and the moment I started moving again, the hum moved with me. Still overhead, still perfectly matched. No echo, no delay. Another sensation joined it then, subtle but unmistakable. The feeling of being watched. Not from behind, not from the sides. From somewhere above and just ahead, like an unseen point had locked onto me and refused to break focus. I didn't want to look up again, but my eyes went anyway. There was nothing there, just thick cloud cover and a faint pale smear of reflected light. The hum remained. I shortened my stride and quickened the pace, heading toward the part of the street where the city usually woke back up again with passing taxis and open late-night diners. I half expected normal noise to snap back into place like someone flipping a switch, but it didn't. Another block passed, then another. The quiet stayed wrong. My heartbeat started to feel louder in my ears than my own footsteps, and I kept resisting the urge to run because something about running felt like acknowledging the fear too openly. The hum pulsed faintly, like it was responding to my tension. Then, somewhere ahead, the soundscape shifted. Distant tires, a car engine, the faint chatter of voices, real city noise. I picked my head up sharply, scanning forward. I could see the intersection where the 24-hour ramen place glowed warm and yellow, steam fogging its windows. The hum wavered. For the first time, it drifted slightly out of rhythm with me. I stepped faster. The muted feeling thinned with each step, like I was walking out of a bubble without noticing where its walls stood. Traffic noise crept back in. Street sounds regained their normal texture. Even the breeze picked up, rustling loose paper near the curb. The hum faded until it wasn't there anymore. I stopped right at the corner and listened hard. Nothing followed. Just the steady, familiar noise of River Point waking back into itself. I exhaled slowly, realizing how tense my shoulders had become. I walked the rest of the way home quickly, though, not enjoying the normal sounds as much as I usually would. When I reached my building and turned the key in the door, the solid click felt oddly grounding. Inside, my apartment looked the same. Same low lamp glow, same quiet hum of the fridge, same pile of shoes by the entry. I locked the door and leaned against it for a second, breathing out slowly. When I finally stepped toward the window and peeked through the blinds, the street below looked exactly as it always had. People passing, cars rolling, night noise alive again. No hum, no strange silence, just the city moving on. Still, the stretch of quiet followed behind my thoughts like an echo that never quite found its source, as if I'd walked through a place the rest of the world wasn't fully aware existed. The inside of my car lit up pale blue like someone had flipped on a ghost version of the dome light, except nothing actually turned on. My hands froze on the steering wheel. The radio screen stayed dark. The dashboard stayed the same dull orange. The glow just filled the space, soft and cold, like it didn't belong to any normal source. I blinked a few times and looked around, waiting for my eyes to adjust or my phone to start buzzing or something, but nothing changed. The glow hung there for maybe 2 or 3 seconds, then drained away like water seeping out of a sink. Suddenly it was just me and the dark again, parked on the side of Old Quarry Road with the engine still idling. I sat there breathing too fast, staring through the windshield at an empty stretch of gravel and weeds. I kept waiting for another flash or noise, but the night stayed quiet. I'd pulled over there because I missed a call from my cousin Renee and was trying to figure out if I should call back. It was late, close to 11:40 p.m., and the road was shut down a mile ahead for construction. I figured I'd just sit there and deal with the call, then head home through the side streets. After the glow disappeared, my phone finally showed normal again. No weird brightness, no new notifications, just Renee's missed call from a few minutes earlier. I called her back, but it went to voicemail. I tried telling myself it had been some kind of reflection. Maybe a car passed on the main road behind me, except I hadn't heard anything, and there weren't any houses or lights close enough to cause that kind of glow. I checked the rearview mirror. Nothing but darkness and the dull outline of my back seat. Still parked, still quiet, still too calm. I forced myself to shift into drive and started moving again, slow and careful toward the turnoff. The tires crunched over gravel, and the sound felt louder than it should have been. I kept glancing down at the dashboard, half expecting the glow to come back. It didn't. I turned onto Birch Trail Drive and headed toward my apartment complex on the east side of town. By the time I reached the first streetlight, my nerves had softened a little. Streetlights meant normal. Houses meant normal. The world working the way it was supposed to. I told myself to forget it. Then it happened again. The second time was weaker, almost like an afterimage, but it filled the car just enough for me to notice. A faint wash of blue slid across the windshield and bled onto the passenger seat. I swerved slightly and corrected, heart hammering hard enough I could feel it in my throat. This one faded even quicker. I pulled into the empty parking lot of a closed hardware store, rolled the window down, and listened for anything at all. Wind, footsteps, a distant engine, something. All I heard was the faint squeak of the loose sign above the store entrance and the hum of the power lines overhead. I got out and stepped under the open sky. The air smelled faintly metallic, sharp and cold like damp coins. I looked around, scanning the lot. A few cars sat abandoned near the far fence. No one else stood nearby. No movement. Slowly, I tilted my head up. The sky was overcast, thick clouds blocking the stars. But above the parked car, I noticed a faint haze, barely visible. Not cloud, not fog, just a subtle distortion in the air, like heat waves above asphalt during summer. Only it hovered perfectly still. I stepped backward without realizing it, then bumped into my own door. The haze drifted a few feet sideways, then thinned until I couldn't see it anymore. I stood there for a moment longer, jaw tight, hands numb at my sides. When nothing else happened, I climbed back in, locked the doors, and drove home faster than I normally did. Inside my apartment, the silence felt heavier than usual. My upstairs neighbor, Miranda, always played music at night, but tonight, her place stayed quiet. I left the hallway light on and sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone, replaying the soft blue glow in my head. I checked the internet for local outages. Nothing. No alerts. I checked the weather radar. Just low clouds and a slight breeze. Around 1:10 a.m., I finally crawled into bed, but sleep didn't come easily. Every time my eyes started to close, I pictured the inside of my car filled with that light. I grabbed my phone, checked the clock again, then placed it face down on the nightstand. At some point, I must have dozed off. I woke suddenly to a faint buzzing sound, not loud enough to identify, but strong enough to pull me out of sleep. The room looked normal. No strange light, no shadows in the corners. Just the dull reflection of the street lamp filtering through the blinds. The buzzing faded slowly. I stayed still, staring at the ceiling fan until my breathing steadied. Morning light crept in eventually, gray and flat behind clouds. I forced myself through a shower, through coffee, through getting dressed for work. It all felt slightly off, like my head was still a step behind the rest of me. When I walked to my car, I paused beside the driver's door. I half expected to see some mark or smudge or anything different. The paint looked the same, no scratches, no fogging, no strange residue. Everything looked normal. At work, my coworker Jalen asked if I looked tired. I brushed it off, told him I slept weird. He laughed and said same, then went back to his desk. Still, the longer the day went on, the more uneasy I felt about what happened the night before. Not panicked, just unsettled, like I'd stepped into the wrong moment somehow and didn't know how to step back out. That night, I drove home earlier, sticking to well-lit roads. No glow, no strange haze, just normal traffic and streetlights. When I pulled into my apartment parking spot and turned off the engine, I sat there a minute longer, listening. The silence pressed in gently, the way it usually did. Right before I opened the door, the rearview mirror shimmered faintly with the softest hint of blue. It barely lasted a blink, just enough to know it was there. Then nothing. I stepped out, shut the door, and walked inside, trying to look back. The parking lot stayed dark and ordinary behind me. Just cars and pavement and the faint hum of the night settling into place. I saw the second set of headlights just as the fog thickened, bright and close enough that I could have sworn another car was riding right alongside my driver's side. But when I glanced over, there was nothing. No shape, no tires on the wet asphalt, just empty fog sliding past the window. I slowed down instinctively, squinting through the white haze that swallowed the edges of the road. The real headlights behind me stayed far back and low, maybe someone coming down the hill slower than me, but the second pair hovered near my door, matching my speed like they were attached. The weird part was they didn't reflect off anything. No guardrail shine, no glint on the wet road, just two pale beams floating in the mist. I drove another half-mile like that, heart tapping slow and uneven, until the fog thinned and the road opened up. As soon as I could see again, the extra lights just faded out like someone turning a dimmer switch. The actual car behind me was nowhere in sight. I told myself it was just fog tricks and stress. I'd had a long shift at the Marina restaurant, and the drive home through the hills always messed with my depth perception. Still, I couldn't shake how steady those lights had been. The next morning, I checked my car for damage, half expecting to see a scrape down the left side. There was nothing. No marks, no signs anyone had been close. I forgot about it until 2 nights later. Same road, same patch of heavy fog near the bend that overlooked the little creek ravine. This time, I drove slower before I even reached it. The second set of headlights appeared earlier, right beside me, perfectly parallel. Again, no car, just glowing bulbs that didn't flicker or bounce like real ones should. I tapped my brakes. The lights slowed too. I accelerated slightly, they matched that as well. I rolled my window down even though the air was cold and wet, expecting maybe to hear an engine or tires on gravel. All I heard was the hush of fog and my own car humming. The lights stayed with me for maybe a full minute before fading when I passed the curve. When I reached my apartment in Ridgeway, I sat there for a while with the engine off, listening to it tick as it cooled. I kept glancing at the side mirror like those lights might follow me into the parking lot. Over the next week, other little things started feeling off. My headlights seemed dimmer sometimes, even though the bulbs were new. My dash clock reset twice, both times stuck at 22:17 before correcting itself. And once, when I came out for work early in the morning, the hood of my car felt warm, even though it had been parked overnight. On Friday night, my coworker Jonah offered to follow me partway home since we both ended around midnight. He complained about the fog being extra thick and joked about ghost roads. We joked until we reached that same stretch. That's when he called me. "Hey," he said, voice slightly shaky, "is someone driving next to you?" What? I asked, gripping the wheel tighter. On your left. There are headlights but no car. My breath caught. You see them too? Yeah, they're just hovering there. I forced myself to look again. The lights were right there, same as before. A calm, neutral brightness that didn't behave like normal beams. Don't slow down, Jonah said. They're pacing you perfectly. We both drove in silence until the fog thinned and the lights dissolved. When we pulled over at the split where he turned toward his place, he got out and walked to my window. I don't want to freak you out, he said, keeping his voice low, but I swear those lights didn't hit the ground at all. They appeared again 2 nights after that. This time, they lingered longer. I kept driving the full length of the fog-covered stretch. The lights never drifted closer or farther, just steady and equal, like company. I started talking out loud without planning to. Okay, what are you doing? I muttered, aiming the words at the empty space beside me. Nothing responded. No sound, no movement. Just the unwavering light. When I reached the end of the road and pulled onto the clearer highway, the fog peeled away and the lights vanished again. I barely slept that night. Over the next few days, my phone recorded strange things. GPS showing stops on that road when I knew I hadn't pulled over. A photo in my gallery of the fog taken from inside my moving car, blurry but centered on those floating lights. I didn't remember taking it. The timestamp read 2:19 a.m. On the 5th night, I decided to see what would happen if I stopped. As soon as the second headlights reappeared, I eased onto the shoulder and brought the car to a halt. The fog clung around me, shifting slowly like smoke. The lights stopped too. Now they hovered only inches from where a car should have been. No vehicle body, no silhouette, just empty space glowing. The air outside felt colder against the glass. Still no sound. I cracked the window slightly. The low hum under everything deepened for a few seconds, then softened again. The lights pulsed once, dimming and brightening like a slow breath. Then, without moving across space, they rose straight upward into the fog and disappeared. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. My chest hurt from holding my breath. I stayed parked another minute, then drove the rest of the way home with the radio off, eyes locked forward. They didn't follow me that night. They didn't show up for nearly a week after that either. I started to think whatever it was, maybe it had finished whatever it came there to do. Then, last night, as soon as I hit that familiar stretch, the fog rolled in thicker than I'd ever seen it, and the lights returned, but this time they weren't beside me. They were ahead. 2 glowing orbs hovering directly over the center of the road, low and still, not acting like a car at all, just waiting. When I slowed, they brightened. As I came closer, the low vibration returned in the air, subtle but undeniable, like pressure building inside a sealed space. I stopped a few yards away. The lights didn't move. I didn't move either. After several long seconds, they drifted slightly to the side, like making room for me to pass. I drove through the space they'd occupied. My whole body felt tense as I passed where they hovered, expecting something to brush the side of the car. But nothing touched me. No impact. No resistance. In my rearview mirror, I saw them settle back into the middle of the road after I passed, glowing softly in the fog like a marker left behind. By the time I reached my apartment, the cloud cover had cleared completely. The sky looked normal, quiet, empty. I sat there before going inside, waiting for the feeling to pass, but it didn't completely leave. Even now, when I think about driving that way again, I pictured those lights returning, steady and patient, like they'd simply paused until I came back. And I had a feeling they'd be waiting again next time. My car alarm started screaming at exactly 2:03 a.m., loud enough to jolt me straight out of sleep. I sat up in bed for a second, disoriented, trying to figure out if I'd imagined it. Then it blared again, shrill and panicked, echoing across the quiet street. My name is Daniel Ortiz, and I lived in a small rental on the edge of Santa Fe, one of those neighborhoods that looked peaceful during the day and felt hollow at night. I grabbed my phone, saw the time, and muttered something under my breath as I pulled on a hoodie and stepped toward the front window. I pushed the curtain aside and looked down at my sedan parked along the curb. The headlights were off, no one near it, no movement. But right there, hovering maybe a foot above the hood, was something I couldn't make sense of. A faint shimmer, almost like heat rising off asphalt, except it held a loose shape. Not solid, not smoke, just a thin, wavering glow that looked like light bending around nothing. The alarm cut off on its own, leaving everything dead silent. The shimmer hung there for maybe 3 seconds more, then thinned out and vanished like it had never been there. I stood frozen, staring through the window, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. No footsteps, no engine starting, no dogs barking, just the normal distant hum of the city and the occasional rustle of tree branches. I stayed by the window for another full minute before finally heading outside. The night air was cool and dry, and the streetlight cast that dull orange glow over everything. I walked around the car, checked the doors, the hood, the trunk. Everything was locked. No scratches, no dings, nothing disturbed. Still, I didn't feel right about it. The next couple nights went by normally, at least on the surface. I kept checking outside before bed, half expecting to see that shimmer again. Nothing. The car stayed quiet. I almost convinced myself it was a trick of sleep or some random electrical glitch. Then 3 nights later, I noticed something else. Around midnight, while I was washing dishes, my kitchen lights dimmed slightly. Not fully off, just weaker for a second, then back to normal. At the same time, I heard a low, distant hum, like the faintest vibration rolling through the air. It lasted maybe 20 seconds and slowly tapered away. I stepped outside onto the porch and scanned the street. Everything looked normal, no shimmer, no movement. The odd feeling stuck with me though, like something was replaying a moment it wasn't done with yet. 2 nights after that, the alarm went off again. Same time range, 2:10 a.m. This time I was already half awake, restless, scrolling on my phone. I moved to the window and looked down fast. The shimmer was back, suspended above the hood, brighter than before, but still faint, like a veil of light that refused to fully show itself. It didn't cast shadows or reflect off nearby surfaces. It just existed. It hovered there, perfectly still, and I realized the air felt wrong. Thick, pressurized, like the moment before a storm breaks, except the sky was clear. A faint clicking sound started, almost like glass lightly tapping together somewhere just beyond hearing range. It wasn't coming from the car. It wasn't echoing from the houses. It just filled the space around it. After several seconds, the shimmer folded inward on itself, shrinking slightly, then disappeared. The clicking stopped. The alarm went silent. I didn't go back to sleep after that. The next morning, I asked my neighbor Carla if she'd heard my car alarm the night before. She said she heard it but didn't see anything strange. Just shrugged it off like it was some broken sensor. A week went by without anything happening. I tried to return to normal, work, errands, random evenings on the couch, but every night I checked the car before bed, looking for any sign of that same presence. Then it happened again, but not with the alarm this time. I was on my way home, late from a closing shift, when I noticed my street seemed darker than usual. One of the streetlights flickered as I pulled in, then steadied. As I turned off the engine, the same faint hum slid through the air, like a low note you feel more than hear. I stepped out of the car and immediately saw it. Not on the hood this time, but hovering above the windshield, drifting slowly from left to right. The shimmer wasn't sharp or defined. It moved with a strange control, like it observed rather than floated. I stood there, keys still in my hand, unsure whether to move closer or not move at all. The air around me felt heavier with every step I took toward it. My ears popped lightly, like when altitude shifts. I got close enough to see faint ripples inside the shimmer, like something moving beneath the surface of the light itself. No words, no sounds, just that hum. It lingered maybe 10 seconds, then rose upward in a smooth, steady motion and faded into the dark sky, leaving nothing behind except normal air and deep quiet. When I finally went inside, my phone showed I'd been standing there longer than I thought. Almost 15 minutes had passed. I didn't remember all of those minutes. The next day felt slightly off, not in a dramatic way, just subtle things. My watch read a different time than the microwave by several minutes. My car clock reset itself without me touching it. The air still smelled faintly metallic around the vehicle. I kept expecting someone else to mention something, but no one did. That night, I didn't sleep much. I stayed awake, listening for any sound outside, any hint of that low hum. Around 3 a.m., my car alarm didn't go off, but my interior lights flickered inside the house. When I looked out the window, there was no shimmer this time, but the hood of the car reflected something faint from above, a pale glow that wasn't coming from any nearby streetlight. I stepped outside slowly, heart racing, scanning the open air above the roof of my house. Nothing visible, just the same heavy stillness. After a minute or two, the pressure faded and normal night sounds returned. The wind picked up slightly. A dog barked in the distance. Somewhere, someone's TV turned on. Everything looked ordinary again. But every time I walked past my car after that, I couldn't shake the feeling that something invisible had been there, lingering just above the metal, aware of me in a way I couldn't explain. The alarms never sounded again. The shimmer never returned. But some nights, when the air felt quiet in that wrong way, I still found myself staring out the window at the hood of my car, waiting for the light to come back. A soft glow pressed through the edges of my curtains, thin and pale, like someone had parked a car right outside and left the high beams on. I squinted at it, still half in that heavy, fuzzy sleep where everything feels slow. I checked my phone on the nightstand. It read 2:18 a.m., no notifications, no missed calls, just the time and the dull blue screen. The glow didn't pulse or move. It just stayed there, seeping in around the fabric in a way that felt wrong somehow. Too even, too quiet. I rolled onto my back and listened. No engines, no footsteps, no voices outside, just the low hum of my fridge through the wall and the faint ticking of the old heater. After a few seconds, curiosity won out over comfort. I pushed myself up and crept over to the window, bare feet cold against the floorboards. I slid the curtain aside slowly, expecting to see a car or maybe some weirdo shining a flashlight around the yard. Instead, I saw the pale glow lifting upward. It rose straight up past the top of the window frame, soundless, smooth, like a dim orb or dome drifting into the dark. No flicker, no trail, just a quiet retreat into the cloudy sky until the night swallowed it. The backyard looked normal again. My fence, the patch of overgrown grass, the crooked old bird bath, no source for the light anywhere. I stood there, curtain still in my hand, staring out like I'd missed something important by a second. My name's Adrian Velez. I lived alone in a rented duplex just outside Port Angeles, close enough to hear the distant waves when the wind shifted right. It had been drizzling earlier that evening, the kind of light coastal rain that left everything damp and smelling slightly metallic already, but this felt different. I cracked the window open a few inches and leaned out. Cold air rolled in, salty and wet. No fresh light, no noise. Just darkness and the soft murmur of far-off surf. I waited. Nothing else happened. Eventually, I shut the window and pulled the curtains closed. I stood there a while longer, listening for an engine start or footsteps on wet gravel, but the night stayed still. Back in bed, sleep didn't come easy. Every tiny sound made my eyes snap open. The old floor creaking in the hallway, the pipes shifting as the heater kicked on and off. I kept glancing back at the curtains, half expecting that glow to seep through again. It didn't. When I finally drifted off, it was shallow and restless. The next morning was gray and foggy, the kind of fog that smeared the outline of everything and made distance hard to judge. I convinced myself maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Half dream, half reflection of passing headlights. That happens sometimes. But when I stepped out onto the back porch to take the trash out, I noticed the grass right beneath my bedroom window looked flattened in a neat circular patch. Not trampled, exactly, just gently bent, like something had pressed down evenly and then lifted away. I crouched, running my fingers over the damp blades. No footprints, no tire tracks, just that smooth, shallow depression in the grass. I shook it off and went about my day. By afternoon, I was back at my job on the docks, unloading shipments with my coworker Mateo, trying not to think about it. But all day I caught myself glancing up at the low clouds, scanning for anything out of place. Nothing appeared. That evening, I mentioned it casually to my neighbor Denise while we both checked our mail. "You ever see weird lights around here at night?" I asked, trying to sound normal. She laughed softly. "Only the usual drunk tourists and their flashlights." "Why?" "Just thought I saw something last night. Probably a reflection." She shrugged and shuffled back inside, not concerned at all. The next few nights passed quietly, enough to lull me even more into thinking it had been a fluke. But then, 3 days later, it happened again. This time, I wasn't asleep. I'd been lying on the couch watching a rerun with the volume low when the living room slowly filled with that same pale light. It crept across the carpet and up the walls like fog made of glow. I muted the TV and sat up straight. The glow wasn't harsh. It wasn't warm either, just steady and dim enough to notice. I approached the sliding glass door that looked out to the backyard. Outside, floating just above the fence line, a rounded haze of light hung completely still. No shape I could clearly define, but not just mist either. It held its form in an unnatural way, like it had edges that my eyes refused to focus on. My throat tightened. I stood there frozen, hand hovering over the door handle, unsure whether opening it was the worst decision or the only way to prove I wasn't losing it. The glow slid sideways, slow and deliberate, tracing along the top of the fence before drifting upward again into the fog, dissolving without a sound. The backyard returned to darkness. I looked at my phone again. 11:36 p.m. This time, the signal bars flickered and dropped to 0 before settling back. A chill crept along my arms. The air felt heavier for a moment, pressed flat and still. Even the distant ocean noise seemed to fade. I didn't open the door, I just stood there until my legs started shaking. That night, I double-checked every lock, every latch, every window. When I finally crawled into bed, I left the curtains slightly open, eyes fixed on the glass, replaying that silent upward drift over and over. Sometime after midnight, I heard a faint vibration through the floor, almost like a large truck passing, except there was no rumble to go with it. Just enough motion to make the water in the bedside glass ripple slightly. Then it stopped. No glow this time, no light, just subtle silence again. I stayed awake for hours, staring, listening, trying to piece together what kind of normal thing could cause all of this. Morning came slow and colorless. The fog clung to the edges of everything. I stepped outside again and noticed the same subtle flattening in the grass, extended farther this time, wider, almost like an impression from something round, but too light to leave actual marks. I felt embarrassed even thinking of it, but I still took a photo on my phone. When I checked the image later, the patch looked less defined than I remembered, just slightly darker grass. The following night, I didn't see the glow, but I smelled it instead. That cold metallic scent drifted faintly through my bedroom, sharp and clean, nothing like damp soil or ocean air. It lingered for a minute, then vanished as if someone had shut a door on it. I sat up, heart hammering, listening for movement outside. Nothing came. By the end of the week, I started wondering if the house itself felt different, like some part of my space was being observed quietly, without urgency, just a presence that arrived, hovered, and left. Then one night, it returned for the last time. I lay in bed with my eyes half closed when the pale glow pushed through the edges of my curtains again. Soft, steady, familiar in a way that made my pulse race. I slid the curtains open. The light hovered higher this time, just beyond the roofline, casting a faint sheen over the wet shingles and fence. Then slowly it lifted, as if responding to nothing but its own quiet timing, and drifted into the cloud cover above. The sky sealed behind it. The street stayed empty. No voices, no engines, just the distant hush of the ocean and the soft creak of my old house settling. I closed the curtains and stood there a long time, letting my eyes adjust back to darkness, trying to make any kind of sense of it all. Nothing else happened after that. No more pressing glow, no humming, no strange patches in the yard. But some nights, when the fog hung low and the curtains stirred slightly in the breeze, I still found myself staring at the window, waiting for that soft, shapeless light to quietly slide upward again. The air felt thicker the second I stepped onto the trail. It wasn't subtle either. I'd walked this same path behind Miller's Ridge 100 times before. It was my regular spot to clear my head after work. Packed dirt, scattered pine needles, a few loose rocks, nothing complicated. I could have walked it blindfolded. That afternoon, though, something felt off the moment my boots hit the first bend. The sky had that dull, overcast look that usually meant rain later, but it hadn't started yet. Just heavy gray clouds sitting low and stubborn. The trees looked normal. The birds sounded normal. Still, the air around me felt wrong, like it had weight. I slowed my pace without really meaning to. Every step took more effort than usual, like walking through humidity that shouldn't have been there in mid-October. My name's Trevor Hargrove, I lived about 10 minutes from the trail in a quiet edge-of-town neighborhood where most people waved but didn't really talk. I'd grown used to the peace. So the silence pressing in that day stood out immediately. The wind had dropped completely. Not a leaf moved. I continued forward, telling myself I was imagining things, but my shoulders stayed tense. The usual sounds faded into this weird, muffled calm that felt like being underwater without the pressure. About 50 yards ahead, just past the narrow section where the trees grew closer together, I saw it. A faint shimmer hanging between two trunks. It wasn't bright. It wasn't even clearly defined. Just a wavering patch of air that looked slightly distorted, like heat rising off asphalt. Except there was no heat. I stopped dead. My heart thudded harder than it should have for something so quiet. The shimmer pulsed gently, almost breathing. Not light, not dark, just a disturbed look in the air that didn't match anything else around me. I swallowed and took a thin step closer. Every instinct told me not to. The pressure in the air intensified slightly as I moved forward, like the silence itself thickened. My breath sounded loud in my ears. "Hello?" I said quietly, even though I had no idea why I was speaking. No response. The shimmer wavered again, its edges blurring and reforming. For a second, I thought I saw a shape behind it, but it never fully came into view. Just the suggestion of something slightly darker than the space around it. Then the birds stopped, all at once. No chirping, no rustle, nothing. The silence pressed so hard it almost rang. I froze, eyes locked on the distortion, and then it faded. Not snapped away, not vanished, just slowly thinned out like mist until the air looked normal again. The weight in the atmosphere lifted subtly, but not completely. I stood there, breathing shallow, waiting for anything else to happen. Nothing did. The forest sounds returned in scattered pieces. A few leaves shifted. Somewhere farther down the ridge, a squirrel rustled through brush. But the uneasy feeling didn't go away. I glanced around, half expecting to see someone watching me, but the trail remained completely empty. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I checked it without breaking eye contact with the path ahead. No signal. That never happened out there. The coverage was usually fine. I slid it back inside my jacket and forced myself to keep walking, slower now, deliberate. The rest of the trail felt subtly warped, like I'd stepped into a place that looked the same but didn't behave the same. Sounds came a half second late. My footsteps seemed quieter than normal. Even my breathing felt off. Another minute passed before I noticed it again, this time farther ahead through the trees. The shimmer had returned. Not in the same spot. It hovered slightly higher now, almost chest level, flickering faintly like air rippling in slow motion. It shifted barely side to side, as if adjusting its balance. I stopped again. The silence grew heavier. Behind the distortion, a vague shape seemed to lengthen and compress, but never clearly resolve. My stomach tightened. "What is this?" I whispered, more to myself than anything. The shimmer began to drift, gliding between branches without disturbing them, not bending twigs, not brushing leaves, just floating along the path like it knew where it was going. Towards me. My feet automatically stepped backward. The air cooled slightly as it approached, enough for my skin to prickle. The pressure in my ears deepened, a dull sensation like descending in an elevator. 5 feet away. 3. Then it stopped. The closest it ever got. I couldn't see through it properly, just endless vague motion, as if something existed just out of reach of clarity. A low hum pulsed once, soft enough that I wasn't sure if I heard it or felt it more through the ground. Then the shimmer collapsed inward and vanished. No fades, no afterglow, just gone. The sound of the forest rushed back in like a snapped cord. Wind returned, leaves moved. I stood there shaking, fully aware how alone I was. For a second I considered running, but my legs felt stiff and unsure. Instead, I turned around and headed back the way I'd come, not daring to look over my shoulder more than once. The hike back took longer than usual, though my watch told me barely 10 minutes passed. When the first houses came into view again, the air finally felt normal. Heavier tension stayed in my body long after I reached my porch. That night, laying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, replaying it all again without any clear sense of what I'd experienced. Sometime after midnight, my phone finally regained signal. 3 missed messages from my sister, none during the time I'd been walking. The next morning, I drove back to the trail, partly hoping to find something physical, some evidence that it hadn't all been in my head. The path looked the same as always. Dry leaves, packed dirt, quiet woods, no shimmering space, no quiet dead zone, just regular forest. I walked only a short distance that time before the pressure returned faintly at the base of my neck. I turned around not long after and headed home. Weeks passed. Nothing happened again. Still, even now, anytime I walk that trail, I notice the same stretch where the air felt wrong, and my pace automatically slows as if my body remembers something my mind still can't figure out. And sometimes, just for a split second, the space between the trees looks like it's breathing. It started with that weird feeling in my chest, like someone was standing close behind me even though the sidewalk was empty. I was walking home from the late shift at O'Rourke's Pharmacy, taking the usual route through the older part of town where the streetlights were spaced too far apart and half of them flickered like they'd given up trying. It was close to midnight. Fog rolling in from the river a few blocks over, thick enough to blur the edges of everything without fully hiding it. My name's Declan Moore, and I'd made this walk 100 times before without thinking about it. Same cracked concrete, same leaning stop sign, same quiet stretch of houses that never seemed to sleep. But that night, every step felt watched. Not the casual kind of watched you get when someone's car slows down or a stranger walks by. This felt heavier, focused, like an awareness that followed just a little too closely to ignore. I glanced over my shoulder the first time and saw nothing, just the glow of a street lamp diffused through fog and the empty road curving back toward the intersection. I kept moving. The feeling didn't fade. It stayed, clinging to the space just behind my shoulder blades, tightening every time my mind tried to relax. My footsteps echoed faintly. The fog curled low around my ankles. Somewhere a dog barked once and went quiet again. I checked over my shoulder a second time. Still nothing. No one's there, I muttered under my breath, mostly to convince myself. The sense of being watched sharpened instead. My posture stiffened without me meaning to. My pace slowed as my eyes kept drifting upward, scanning the rooftops, the tree line, the gaps between houses. That's when I noticed it. A faint point of light sat behind the clouds above the street, barely visible through the haze. Not bright like a plane beacon, not twinkling like a distant star, just a small, pale dot resting behind the fog layer. It held still for a second, then shifted slightly. My stomach dropped. I slowed to a stop, eyes fixed on it. The light slid backward, almost like it noticed me noticing it, and then slipped behind a heavier stretch of cloud and vanished. The sky returned to its dull gray-orange glow from the city lights. I stood there longer than made sense, staring upward, waiting for it to reappear. Nothing. The fog drifted lazily, swallowing the empty space where the light had been. I released a breath I hadn't realized I held and started walking again, telling myself it was probably a plane at just the wrong angle, or some reflection bouncing off moisture in the air. Still, that sense of being watched didn't go away. If anything, it got sharper. I kept glancing up now, scanning for another glimpse of that faint dot. The sky stayed blank, yet the awareness lingered like eyes pressing in from every direction. My boots scuffed against gravel where the sidewalk broke near the old baseball field, and the feeling intensified again, enough that I actually stopped outright and turned around fully. Nothing behind me, just fog, lamplight, and quiet streets. "Okay," I whispered, feeling more unsettled by my own voice echoing back faintly than by the silence. I turned forward and continued, shoulders tight, jaw clenched. A block later, as I passed the empty lot where the old Miller place had burned down years ago, the air shifted. Not colder, not warmer, just heavier. The watched feeling pressed closer. I looked up instinctively. The faint light had returned. This time, it sat slightly to the right, barely visible through the fog, like a pinprick held in place behind a thin curtain. It didn't pulse or flash, it simply hovered, steady and aware. I slowed again, heart thudding. The light slipped sideways, smooth and controlled, before tucking itself behind another patch of cloud and fading from sight. The fog swallowed it whole. The silence around me thickened, no dogs, no wind, no passing cars, just my breathing, and that quiet, hovering sense of attention. I quickened my pace, shoes tapping faster now against the pavement as I tried to put distance between where I stood and whatever seemed to be watching from above. The streetlights ahead glowed dimmer through the mist, stretching like weak guides toward the neighborhood turn. Behind me, nothing followed that I could see. Yet that awareness stayed locked onto me, moving as I moved, staying just out of sight. My chest tightened. My hands felt clammy despite the cool air. When I reached the corner near Kinsley Drive, I dared another glance up. For a brief second, the light flickered into view again, just barely there, hovering behind the thicker band of clouds. Then gone. My pace turned practically into a brisk walk, every step louder now in my ears. "Just get home," I muttered. The final stretch toward my place closed in slowly, despite how fast I felt like I was moving. The moment I stepped onto my block, the feeling dulled slightly, like whatever had been watching no longer hovered directly overhead, but still lingered nearby. I glanced up again, more cautious than curious. The sky returned to normal. No glow, no faint pinprick, only the fog drifting silently over dark rooftops. The sense of eyes faded little by little as I reached my front steps, though tension still clung to my spine as I unlocked the door. Inside, the familiar smell of old wood and cleaning spray greeted me like relief. I shut and locked the door, resting my forehead briefly against the cool glass. The silence inside felt heavier than usual. I moved through the hallway, switching on lamps, letting warm light fill each room as if it could guard against the unease I couldn't explain. Eventually, I found myself standing by the living room window, curtain pulled back slightly as I scanned the sky outside. No light appeared, yet for a long while I didn't feel completely alone. Minutes passed, then more. Gradually, the normal sounds of the world filtered back in. A distant car hum, the slow tick of the kitchen clock, the pipes settling in the walls. The watched feeling ebbed to a faint whisper, and then faded entirely. But even as everything returned to what looked like normal, every time the fog thickened near the clouds and I glanced upward, I half expected to see that pale point hovering again, slipping just out of sight like it never quite intended to be known. The forest went quiet so fast it felt like someone had muted it. I noticed it mid-sentence, halfway through complaining to myself about the cheap tent zipper snagging again. One second there were crickets, beetles clicking against leaves, the low, steady buzz that always filled the air this time of night. The next, there was nothing, not a single chirp. I stopped moving and just listened. Silence. Not peaceful silence. Heavy silence. I was camping alone at Lake Arbordale, a small wooded site a half hour outside of Harrier's Point. It was early fall, still warm enough for mosquitoes, but cool enough to keep the sweat from sticking. The sky had been clear earlier, but low clouds had started rolling in around dusk, smudging the stars and making the trees look taller than usual. My name's Colin Dreyer. I'd done solo trips plenty of times. I knew the normal sounds of the woods. This wasn't normal. I stepped out from the tent, boots sinking slightly into the soft dirt. The lake shimmered faintly to my left, reflecting a weak sliver of moonlight that kept disappearing behind the clouds. Everything felt too still, like the air itself had paused. "Seriously," I muttered, scanning the tree line. No movement. Leaves hung limp. Even the wind had died down. Then I saw it. A dim light hovered just above the tree line on the far side of the clearing. Not bright, not sharp, just a soft, pale glow sitting there, barely illuminating anything around it. It didn't cast beams. It didn't flicker. It looked like someone had drawn a faint circle of light and left it suspended in the air. I stared at it, unsure if I should blink. It wasn't rising. It wasn't falling. Just there. My stomach tightened in a slow, creeping way. "Okay," I whispered. "Nope." The silence around me felt wrong, like everything that usually lived out here had decided to hold its breath. The only sound I could hear was my own, shallow breathing. The glow shifted slightly, just a few inches, drifting sideways like it was following a path I couldn't see. The trees beneath it didn't brighten, the ground didn't reflect it. It existed without touching anything around it. I took one step back, then another. The dim light slid a little higher and then slowly dipped, as if fading behind the top of the trees without actually moving away. And then it vanished. Just gone. No flicker. No trail. No sign it had ever been there. Right after, the insects slowly crept back into the night, one chirp at a time, building until the forest sounded alive again. But the normal noise felt forced, like an echo of how things were supposed to be. I stood frozen, staring at the space where the light had hung. Just pack up, I said to myself, voice barely steady. Just pack and go. Still, I didn't move right away. I kept looking as if I might spot it again or catch some explanation trying to emerge from the darkness. Nothing did. Finally, I turned back toward the tent and started shoving things into my bag with more force than necessary. I zipped it closed, slung it over my shoulder, and tried not to let my eyes wander too much. The walk back to the trailhead felt longer than it had earlier. Every small crack of a branch made my shoulders tense. Every brief rustle of leaves drew my attention sharp as a knife. About halfway down the path, something odd happened again. The night sounds dulled. Not full silence this time, but softened, as if a layer had been placed between me and the world. The air felt thick, almost pressurized. I slowed. Faintly ahead through the trees, I saw another glow. Smaller this time. Lower. It brushed the forest floor for a split second before lifting upward and dissolving into the darkness. My heartbeat thudded harder now. I didn't want to follow it. I also didn't want to turn my back on whatever direction it might choose next. So I stood there, frozen, waiting for something else to happen. It didn't. The glow never returned. The forest resumed its normal soundtrack, almost too cheerful in contrast. By the time I reached the parking area, my hands were shaky, even though the night air wasn't cold. I opened the trunk, tossed my pack inside, and got into the driver's seat with more relief than I'd expected. I sat there for a minute, just breathing, listening to the quiet tick of cooling metal. The headlights cut a familiar, safe path through the trees ahead. I glanced once more toward the tree line. Dark. Unremarkable. Just forest. The drive home felt endless, my eyes jumping to every bit of reflected light off the roadside. But nothing followed. Nothing appeared above the trees. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the porch light and familiar sight of my house calmed my nerves a little. Still, I didn't fully relax until I locked the door behind me. Inside, everything hummed with ordinary life. Refrigerator, ceiling fan, the faint glow of my phone charging. I checked the time, 11:42 p.m. Only an hour had passed since I'd noticed the silence in the woods, but it felt much longer. I made some tea just to steady my hands, standing at the kitchen window while it cooled. Outside, the trees along the edge of my yard swayed quietly. No strange light, no silence. Everything looked exactly how it always had. But sometime around 2 in the morning, when sleep still wouldn't come, I heard it again. A moment of stillness. Just a second, where the world outside felt muted. Then a very faint glow brushed the tops of the distant trees beyond my backyard, pale and brief, like a whisper of the same thing from the lake, and then it slipped away, leaving the night unchanged. I noticed the star wasn't moving like the others while I was lying on the hood of my car trying to cool off. The day had been brutal, one of those dry Nevada afternoons that felt like the air itself was made of dust. By the time I reached the gravel pullout along Route 50, the heat finally started bleeding away, leaving the kind of cool that made your skin feel tight and awake. The road was empty. No cars for miles, just sagebrush, open land, and a wide sky that always felt too big to fully take in. My name's Everett Rowe, and I'd stopped there more out of habit than intention. Used to do it when I got overwhelmed. Just pull over, stare up for a bit, let my brain slow down. That night felt perfect for it. No clouds, no moon, just a clean black sky filled with points of light. I lay back with my arms folded under my head and let my eyes adjust. The stars sharpened slowly, the longer I stared. The silence felt deep but comfortable, broken only by the faint ticking of my car cooling down and an occasional dry gust pushing through the brush. After a while, one of the stars caught my attention. It wasn't brighter than the rest. It just felt off, like it wasn't quite following the same invisible path as the others. I focused on it more and realized it hadn't shifted at all compared to the rest of the sky. Everything else drifted, subtle but steady. That one didn't. I frowned and pointed a finger at it, tracking carefully. "Come on," I muttered. "Move." I figured maybe it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, so I blinked a few times and looked elsewhere, then back again. Still fixed. A few seconds later, it twitched. Not flashed. Moved. Just a slight sideways nudge, then paused again. My stomach tightened a bit. I sat up slightly, resting my elbows on the hood, eyes locked on that single point of light. It looked ordinary, like any other star, except for that faint movement. Then it shifted again, this time in a short diagonal line like a lazy pen stroke moving upward and left. It didn't streak, didn't fade, just slid. My pulse picked up, slow and intentional, like a quiet alarm going off deep in my chest. Okay, that's not normal, I whispered. The star paused again, perfectly still for a few seconds, then moved in the opposite direction, tracing a smooth zigzag through the empty space around it. Not fast, not erratic, just deliberate. There was no sound, no plane noise, no flicker of light below, just silent movement that didn't line up with anything I knew the sky was supposed to do. My phone buzzed faintly beside me on the hood, a text from my friend Kieran, who'd been driving back from Reno and was supposed to pass by soon. I picked it up and typed, "Hey, I'm pulled off near marker 188. You close?" "5 mins," he replied. I glanced back up at the star. It had stopped again, then shifted once more, another slow zig, another zag. The air around me felt slightly cooler now, like the night had sharpened somehow. Even the distant hum of the highway, faint as it was, seemed quieter. When Kieran's headlights finally appeared in the distance, I felt oddly relieved. Not because I felt in danger, but because the idea of someone else seeing this too meant I wasn't alone with it. He pulled in beside me, gravel crunching softly under his tires. The moment his engine turned off, the night returned to its stretched silence. "You okay?" he called out as he stepped from the car. "Yeah," I said. "Just look up." He tilted his head back, scanning lazily at first. "What am I looking for?" "That star right there," I said, pointing directly toward it. "Watch it." He squinted. "Which one? They all look the same. The one that's not moving like the rest. It looks fine to me. Just wait." As if it heard us, the star slid once more, a small zigzag, careful and smooth. "There," I said quickly. "Did you see that?" He narrowed his eyes. "It moved?" "Yeah." It stopped now. We both watched it in absolute silence. It didn't move again. Not a single twitch. It just sat there, blending completely back into the quiet pattern of the sky, indistinguishable from every other point of light. "You sure that wasn't just your eye?" he asked after a moment. "I watched it zigzag," I said. "Twice. It wasn't a plane." He shifted his stance. I didn't hear anything. Neither did I. We stood there longer than needed, staring upward like it might suddenly reveal itself again, but the sky held still. No more strange movement, no shifting, no drifting, just stars behaving the way they always had. Kieran eventually shrugged. "You've been out here too long, man. Terrain messes with your brain." "Yeah," I murmured, but my chest still felt tight in a quiet way. We leaned against our cars for a bit, thus all talking about random things, the drive, the heat, the slow week, but I kept glancing back up every few seconds, studying the same section of sky. Nothing. Eventually, he said his goodbyes and pulled back onto the road, taillights fading down the long, dark stretch. I stayed another 10 minutes after that, refusing to let curiosity completely win, but not ready to shake it off either. The star didn't move again. Still, as I walked back around to the driver's seat, the sense of having witnessed something that wasn't meant to perform in front of me lingered quietly under my skin. The drive home passed without incident. The road stayed empty. The air cooled steadily. The desert folded back into its usual nighttime hush. When I pulled into my driveway and shut the engine off, the normal softness of my regular world came back. Porch light glowing, sprinkler ticking faintly, my neighbor's dog rustling in their yard. Inside, I dropped my keys on the counter and poured a glass of water, hands still slightly warm from the steering wheel. Everything felt mundane again. Still, out of habit more than fear, I stepped onto my back porch and looked up. The stars stretched endlessly above. None of them moved. None of them zigged or zagged. They just existed, steady and distant and quiet. I stayed a minute longer anyway, just to be sure, before finally heading inside and letting the door close gently behind me. The glow woke me before I even realized I'd opened my eyes. My bedroom felt dim but not dark, like someone had turned on a soft lamp and pointed it at the ceiling. The problem was, I didn't have any lights on. My curtains were pulled shut the way I always left them, thick enough to block out the street lamp across the road. Still, the walls held this faint pale color, like washed out moonlight, but stronger. I pushed myself up on my elbows and looked around, confused and sleepy. My phone screen on the nightstand read 3:17 a.m. The light didn't flicker. It didn't pulse. It just sat there, quiet and even, filling the corners of the room without any obvious source. I slid out of bed and padded over to the window. The curtains felt cool under my fingers as I pulled them apart just enough to peek through. Outside, above the quiet line of houses across the street, a soft glow drifted slowly through the sky. It wasn't sharp or blinding, more like a wide blur of pale white with a faint yellow tint, moving carefully from left to right like it had all the time in the world. No sound came from it. No wind changed. No dogs barked. It just glided, perfectly smooth, low enough that it passed just above the rooftops. My heart started beating harder, not in panic, just sudden awareness. "What the hell?" I whispered. The glow continued its slow path, sliding past the neighbor's chimney, then over the maple tree by Mrs. Calderon's yard. The whole street stayed asleep. No lights flipped on. No one came to their window. It felt like the world had paused to let this thing pass through. I pressed my forehead lightly to the cool glass, trying to catch more detail. It didn't look solid. It didn't look like any drone or helicopter I'd ever seen. It didn't cast a clear beam or shadow, just this floating smear of light that moved too smoothly to belong to anything mechanical. It finally drifted behind the row of houses at the far end of the block and vanished without a trace. The moment it disappeared, my room went dark again. I stood there, eyes adjusting, listening for anything that might follow. No hum, no echo, just the faint ticking of my old wall clock and the low hum of the fridge down the hall. I stayed by the window another minute, staring into the quiet streets like maybe it would come back. Nothing happened. I crawled back into bed and pulled the blanket up, trying to convince myself it had been a dream fragment slipping into reality. But my sheets were cool. My room smelled the same. My dog, Waffle, slept curled at my feet, breathing slow and steady. About 10 minutes later, I noticed the room faintly brighten again. Not as strong as before, but enough that the ceiling pale-washed color returned just a little. I sat up immediately. The glow had returned, now lower, sliding more slowly this time, as if it decided to take a longer look. I got up again and pulled the curtain aside. It moved across the sky with the same deliberate calm, drifting behind the rooftops and disappearing into the darkness beyond the far yards. Still silent. Still smooth. Still wrong. I checked my phone again. 3:29 a.m. My stomach felt tight, but not scared in a way I could easily explain. It felt like that moment before someone speaks directly to you in a quiet room. I didn't sleep after that. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the normal sounds of the neighborhood slowly return. A distant car passed. Pipes clicked as the heater cycled. Somewhere, someone coughed. By sunrise, everything looked normal again. The sky was clear and washed pale blue, the kind that made you second-guess anything strange that happened overnight. Kids walked past on their way to the bus stop. Mrs. Calderon watered her petunias like always. The world had reset. Still, I kept watching the upper edge of rooftops whenever I stepped outside. Later that afternoon, I texted my friend Mateo about it, half joking, half not. He told me I probably caught a weird reflection or weather balloon, something normal I just never paid attention to before. I wanted to believe that. But when night fell again and the house went quiet, I felt myself staying more alert than usual. I didn't turn off my bedside lamp until I couldn't keep my eyes open anymore. Sometime long after midnight, the glow returned. This time it didn't wake me with brightness. It woke me with the strange absence of darkness. I opened my eyes and saw the corners of my room lit the same pale way as before. My body tensed before my mind fully caught up. Again, I moved to the window. Again, the soft drifting glow floated just above the homes, but now it moved slower, like it lingered. It passed over the roof of my own house, so close I felt like if I reached up, I might touch whatever surface emitted that light. Still no sound. Still no clear shape. Just this wide, floating presence sliding past with quiet certainty. I felt watched, not by eyes, not by something I could see, just the sensation of being noticed. The glow paused briefly, almost imperceptibly, hovering just beyond the roofline like it hesitated. Then it continued drifting, easing behind the distant houses and dissolving into night again. The room returned to full darkness, leaving me standing alone at the window, unsure if my breathing had been that shallow the whole time. I didn't tell anyone else after that. Not because it felt unbelievable, but because I couldn't find the right way to describe how quiet it had been, how smooth. how carefully it moved, like it wasn't bound by the same rules as everything else around it. For the next few nights, nothing happened. No glow, no faint light creeping through the curtains. Just a normal black sky and the steady low buzz of sleep. Eventually, the tension faded slightly, but every night when I lay down, my eyes stayed on the faint outline of the window just a beat too long, waiting to see if that soft, drifting light would return and glide past my home again, silent and slow, as if it had simply taken a detour through my street for reasons I wasn't meant to understand. The radio faded from an old country station into soft static without me touching anything. I glanced down at the dial, thinking maybe I'd bumped it, but both my hands were still on the steering wheel. Outside the windshield, a dull glow hovered at the very end of the gravel road, about where the tree lines started. It wasn't bright, just enough to notice against the dark. I was parked up on the overlook outside Marine Falls, the one people used when they didn't feel like hiking all the way down to the water. It was late, probably close to 10, and the air had that damp, salty feel that came off the ocean. A thin layer of fog hung low over everything, but the sky above was clear enough to see a few stars. My friend Caleb had canceled on a late-night drive, so I'd gone alone just to clear my head. The glow didn't move yet. It just floated there, steady and quiet, like it had always been part of the road. I turned the engine off to see if the radio would reset, and the static kept going for another 2 seconds before cutting out completely. The sudden quiet felt heavy. I rolled my window down a crack and waited to hear the usual night sounds. Bugs, distant traffic, the ocean far off, but everything sounded muted, like someone had lowered the volume on the world. The light pulsed once, faintly. Not flickering, more like a slow inhale and exhale. I told myself it was probably someone's headlights angled weird through the fog. That stretch of road got almost no traffic, but it wasn't impossible. I leaned forward to see if I could spot any shape behind the glow, but there was nothing. Just woods and that single dim point. Then my phone buzzed and scared the hell out of me. It was a text from my neighbor Gina asking if I'd picked up my mail again. I looked at my signal and noticed it had dropped to 1 bar, which was strange for this spot. Usually it was full out here. I typed back that I'd grab it tomorrow, hit send, and watched the message hang there for a solid 10 seconds before finally going through. When I looked back up, the glow had shifted slightly to the right, not rising or falling, just sliding sideways, like it was following the line of the road. I eased my foot back onto the brake and turned the key to start the car. The engine hesitated before finally kicking over. The dashboard lights came on dimmer than usual. I waited another minute, just staring, trying to convince myself I was overthinking it. The glow slid a little more and then stopped again. A soft hum started, barely audible. Not from the car. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. The kind of sound you'd feel more than hear, like a vibration pressing gently against your ears. I checked my mirrors. No cars, no people, no movement. Just me and that light. I pulled forward slowly, tires crunching on the gravel. The glow stayed the same distance away, like it was tied to my car with an invisible string. 10 feet forward, it moved 10 feet too. I stopped. It stopped. My pulse picked up, and the air inside the car felt suddenly too warm. I rolled the window further down and called out, half joking, half nervous. "Hello?" My voice sounded small. It didn't echo. The forest line at the end of the road looked darker than it should have, as if the light wasn't really touching anything around it. The hum thickened for a moment, then dropped just as quickly, leaving my ears ringing softly. My headlights flicked once, like someone tapped the switch, but my hands never moved. I felt that cold, creeping feeling in the pit of my stomach, the one you get when you realize a situation is shifting out of normal territory. I decided I didn't need to be brave. I reversed carefully, eyes locked on that glow. As the car rolled back, the light drifted with me, still keeping its distance. The fog around it started to thin, but the glow didn't get brighter. It stayed dull and smooth, almost flat. Another strange thing happened. My clock on the dashboard changed from 10:14 to 10:16 in a blink, skipping a minute. I hadn't even been out there long enough to notice time passing. The radio snapped back on for a second. A low burst of static followed by a faint voice that didn't sound like music or a DJ, just a clipped mumble, too distorted to make out. Then silence again. I backed all the way until I was nearly at the main road. The glow finally stopped moving and hovered where the gravel met the trees. It stayed there, motionless, like it had finished whatever it was doing. I put the car in park and sat there breathing slowly, trying to calm the trembling in my hands. The hum had softened but never fully faded. I watched for another minute, then another. The glow dimmed just a little, then suddenly slid upward and vanished into the fog without any trailing light or sound. The night felt wrong after that. Too quiet, too empty. I waited a few more moments before pulling out onto the main road. As I drove home, the radio behaved normally, playing some late-night talk show, but I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, expecting to see that dim light floating behind me again. The rest of the drive passed in a haze. Streetlights flickered as I came back into town, and I noticed a few porch lights turning on and off randomly, but I didn't know if that meant anything or if my brain was just trying to connect dots. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat there for a long time before getting out. The air felt heavy again, like before a storm, but the sky was still clear. Inside, everything looked normal. My dog barely lifted his head when I walked in, which was strange on its own. Later, lying in bed, I replayed the whole thing over and over. The static, the way the light kept pace, the skipped minute. I checked my phone again before sleeping. My sent text to Gina showed the timestamp as 10:15 p.m., even though I swore I sent it closer to when I first pulled up. I never saw the glow again. But sometimes when I drive past that overlook now, my radio softens for just a second, like it's about to slip back into static. And I feel that same tight pressure in the air, like something is paying attention just beyond the edge of view. The vibration rolled through the car so lightly at first, I thought it was just the engine settling. I had been parked at a small pull-off just outside Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, killing time before heading the rest of the way home. The sun had dropped behind the low hills, and the air still felt thick with leftover heat from the day. The asphalt shimmered faintly, like it hadn't let go of the warmth yet. My name is Darren Cole, and I'd pulled over because my head felt full after driving for hours. The town lights were far off, barely visible, and the desert around me looked flat and endless. No other cars, no wind, just quiet. Then that faint tremor passed through the steering wheel and the seat beneath me. It wasn't sharp. It was more like the sensation you get when a semi rolls by, except nothing moved on the road. No headlights, no sound, just that dull vibration, humming, almost, lasting a few seconds before fading. I sat there listening, waiting for it to happen again. Outside, the horizon had turned a dusty purple, the last of the daylight thinning out. That's when I noticed the glow. Low and far off, just above the silhouette of the hills, a soft, pale light drifted from left to right. It looked too smooth to be a plane and too silent to be anything I recognized. It didn't brighten the ground in front of it. It just hovered there, steady. I leaned forward instinctively, gripping the wheel like I needed to ground myself. The vibration came back, a little stronger this time, like something heavy passed nearby even though the road remained empty. The light kept gliding, slow and calm, as if it had its own path no one else could see. I cracked the window, expecting to hear something, but the air was still and dry. No engine noise, no wind, just quiet and that faint glow moving along the horizon. After maybe a minute, the light paused. Not slowed, just stopped. It sat there, unmoving, the way a star might hang in the sky, except this was far too low for that. I watched it, jaw tight, eyes burning from not blinking. The vibration stopped too. Everything went still. I checked my mirrors, half expecting to spot another car or some source behind me. Nothing. Empty road in every direction. A strange pressure filled the space around the car, like my ears wanted to pop, but never quite did. My phone screen lit up with a notification and then faded again. The time read 8:17 p.m. I kept staring at that pale dot, trying to make sense of it. Was it someone using a drone? A weird reflection off distant glass? Even those explanations didn't sit right. The glow slowly brightened, not harsh, just steady enough to make my skin feel tight. And then it started moving again, gliding in the opposite direction this time, slower, like it was reconsidering where it wanted to go. As it moved, the faint vibration returned, but softer, softer, like a distant heartbeat I could feel in the floor of the car. I opened the door partway and stepped out, boots hitting warm gravel. The air smelled like dust and sage. No sound of insects. No breeze. The glow slid just above the line where land met sky. It never rose, never dipped, just floated. Something about it made me feel watched, even though it barely felt aware of anything at all. A memory hit me suddenly, of my older brother Jonah telling me about strange lights he swore he saw once near Alamogordo when we were younger. I'd laughed it off back then. Standing there, staring at this thing, I didn't feel like laughing. The light paused again, almost like it sensed I was paying attention. I stayed still, afraid that movement would change whatever was happening. Minutes dragged by. The air felt heavier somehow, pressing down without actually weighing anything. The desert around me should have been alive with small sounds, but it felt muted, like the world had been turned down a notch. Then slowly the glow began to fade, not blinking out, just dimming, thinning, blending into the horizon until the outline vanished completely. The landscape returned to its plain, dark shape, like nothing had happened. And just as quietly as it arrived, the vibration stopped again. I stood there another few minutes, staring at the same empty stretch of desert, waiting for the light to come back, or for the rumble to return. Nothing did. Eventually, I slid back into the car and shut the door, the quiet clicking sealing me in. The air inside felt too still. I turned the key in the ignition just to hear something familiar, the low engine idle settling around me. The radio came on softly, static and a faint country song from somewhere miles away. I turned it off almost immediately. I didn't want anything layered on top of what I just heard and felt. I sat there longer than I meant to, eyes flicking between the horizon and the dashboard. The time ticked forward normally. No jumps, no odd behavior. After maybe 10 minutes, I finally pulled back onto the road, headlights cutting through the dark as I headed out. The drive home felt normal enough. Traffic picked up near the outskirts of town. Streetlights steadied my nerves slightly. Still, every time the road curved and the land stretched open again, I found myself scanning the horizon, searching for that soft, pale glow. It never returned. Later that night, lying in my own bed with the fan humming and the distant sound of my neighbor's dog barking, I replayed that moment again and again. The way the vibration passed through the car. The way the light just paused like motion didn't matter to it. No explanation ever felt right. Not drones. Not planes. Not anything familiar. All I knew for certain was that for a few minutes out there in the quiet desert, something had moved across the horizon that didn't seem to follow the same rules as everything else around it. And then it left, quietly, without leaving anything behind. The power went out right as I was rinsing a mug in the kitchen sink, and everything dropped into that dull, heavy quiet you only notice when it happens all at once. No fridge hum, no heater, no little buzz from the overhead light, just stillness and the faint sound of wind pushing snow against the windows. My name's Elise Krawiec. I lived alone in a small brick house on the edge of Maple Run, a quiet suburban strip that normally felt too boring to hold anything strange. That night was already off, though. The snow had started earlier than forecast, thick flakes piling up fast, muffling the whole neighborhood like someone threw padding over the world. I stood there, hands still wet, waiting for the lights to flicker back. They didn't. I grabbed my phone and saw no signal. Not surprising. Storms messed with it sometimes. I sighed and dried my hands on my sweatshirt, stepping into the living room. That's when I saw it. A pale glow pressed through the curtains, soft and wide like a muted moonlight, but lower, closer. The curtain fabric caught the light and turned it into this faint silvery wash across the wall and coffee table. At first I thought maybe one of the neighbors had a generator or a truck had pulled up outside, but the glow didn't flicker or move. It just sat there, steady and calm. I walked closer, heart tapping faster in a slow, annoyed rhythm. "Hello?" I muttered, feeling dumb immediately. The street outside should have been dark. During outages, the whole block usually dipped into total black. But this light didn't feel like street lighting. It didn't hum. It didn't streak. It didn't cast shadows the way headlights did. It just existed. I pulled the curtain back slightly, expecting to see a car, maybe Todd from across the street checking on his snowblower or some utility truck parked crookedly. There was nothing. Snow covered the sidewalk, pristine and smooth. No tire tracks, no footprints. The glow wasn't coming from any visible source. It just hung there, suspended a little above the street, like a hovering fog that shone instead of clouded. My breath fogged the glass as I stared. A faint blur shifted inside the glow. Not a shape exactly, just a slightly darker patch moving lazily from one side to the other. It reminded me of how fish sometimes move behind cloudy water. I stepped back. Something about the silence bothered me more than the light. No cars, no wind anymore, not even the distant crunch of someone walking their dog. The heating kicked off completely, and the house dropped a degree fast. I wrapped my arms around myself and kept watching. The glow pulsed once, very soft, like a heartbeat. I checked the time on my phone, 8:42 p.m. It felt later. I tried the light switch just to see if anything flickered. Still dead. The glow outside brightened slightly, enough that my living room looked dim but visible, outlines of furniture clear where only shadows should have been. I noticed dust motes drifting through the beam, slow and aimless. Then I heard a faint tapping sound from somewhere above the house. Not on the roof exactly, more like a dull pressure shifting, the way ice expands in pipes but slower. I froze, eyes still fixed on the curtains. The darker patch inside the glow moved again, this time lower, like it was tracing the outline of the front yard. It didn't look solid, just an absence in brightness. I edged closer to the door and pressed my palm lightly to the cool glass. No heat, no vibration, just cold and very faint static, like when you touched an old TV. The glow held steady. Then, as suddenly as it came, the power snapped back on. The living room light blinked overhead. The heater groaned back to life. The fridge whirred. Sound rushed back into the house like water filling an empty bowl, and the glow vanished. Outside was pure darkness again, except for the normal porch lights down the block slowly turning back on, one by one. The snow remained untouched. I stood there breathing shallow, staring through the window, expecting to see anything that made sense. A truck driving away, someone moving. Even just a shift in the air. Nothing. I unlocked the front door and stepped onto the porch, boots crunching softly into fresh snow. The air hit cold and sharp, but clean. No strange haze, no scent except snow and damp concrete. The street looked exactly how it always did after a storm. Silent. Ordinary. I walked a few steps down the path and studied the area where the glow had been, but the ground showed no tracks, no melted spots, nothing flattened or disturbed. My phone buzzed suddenly with a missed text notification from my sister, Mara, sent 40 minutes earlier. I hadn't heard it come through. I checked the time again, 9:07 p.m. I didn't remember 40 minutes passing at all. I headed back inside, locking the door behind me and flipping the porch light back off. The house felt normal again, but heavier somehow, like the walls had absorbed something and didn't know where to put it. I sat on the couch, staring at the curtained window, waiting for the glow to return. It didn't. The snow kept falling outside, steady and dumb, soft flakes catching faint reflection from the street lamps. Cars passed occasionally now, tires hissing over the wet road. I tried distracting myself, scrolling through my phone, reheating my tea, anything that made the night feel routine again. Every few minutes I glanced toward the window. Nothing. Close to midnight, I finally forced myself to turn in. The bedroom was colder than usual, but not unbearable. I left a small lamp on, just enough to break the dark. When I slid under the blankets, I noticed the faintest flicker of pale light sweep across the opposite wall, like a reflection from a passing mirror. I rolled to face the window. Outside, far above the rooftop, something pale drifted slowly across the snow-heavy clouds. Dim enough, I almost thought I imagined it. It moved smoothly, then thinned and blended into the gray sky until it became another layer of night. My alarm clock read 12:03 a.m. The power stayed steady. No flickering, no more tapping sounds, just quiet and the slow hum of normal life. I lay there until my breathing evened out again, listening to the heater cycle, the distant hush of trees shifting under snow. Everything stayed where it belonged. By morning, the street looked ordinary. Plows ran through early, neighbors brushed off cars, dogs pulled at leashes, and no one mentioned anything strange. But I kept thinking about that soft glow pressing through my curtains, calm and patient, like it had been waiting for something I didn't understand. I was about 3 miles up the Pine Wash Trail when it happened. It was late afternoon in early October, the kind where the air in the Utah foothills cools fast once the sun dips. I'd taken the trail alone like I usually did after work, wanting to clear my head before going home. My name's Matt, and I've hiked that trail more times than I can count. Nothing unusual ever happens there. The trail loops around a low ridge before curling back toward the parking area. I was somewhere near that curve when I noticed something odd on the ground off to the right. At first, I thought it was just a spot where someone had set down gear or maybe where a deer had bedded down. But when I stepped closer, it didn't look like that. About 5 feet across, the leaves on the ground were pressed completely flat. Not crushed like someone had stepped on them, pressed. Smooth. Even, like a heavy plate had been set on them and then lifted. Every leaf pointed outward a little, like they'd been pushed from the center. I crouched down and ran my hand over them. They didn't spring back. They were cool, colder than the dirt around them. The air in that circle felt cooler too. I stood up and looked around for some explanation. No footprints, no animal tracks, no sign of a tent or anything like that. Just the trail behind me, the trail ahead, and pine trees shifting quietly in the breeze. I took a few steps back onto the trail, still staring at that ring. I pulled out my phone to take a picture, but the camera wouldn't focus. Everything in the frame looked smudged and smeared, like the lens was dirty. I wiped it on my shirt and tried again. Same thing. The center of the screen, the part where the flattened leaves were, just wouldn't focus. I gave up and pocketed the phone, feeling weirdly uneasy. I don't know why the focus thing got to me so much, but it did. I kept glancing back at the ring as I walked. 2 minutes later, something made me stop again. I didn't hear anything. It wasn't like the woods suddenly went silent or anything dramatic like that. It was more like a shift in pressure, like when you're in a plane and your ears are just about to pop, a subtle tightness in the air. I looked up. Directly overhead, the sky seemed wrong. There was a circular blur moving slowly across it, almost invisible if you weren't looking straight at it. It wasn't a cloud. It was too smooth, too perfectly shaped, and it slid across the blue without changing. Imagine smudging something on your phone screen and then moving the smudge around. That's what it looked like. I froze in the middle of the trail and watched it drift. It didn't go fast, just glided along, shifting the light slightly as it passed. Not enough to cast a shadow, but enough that the sky inside the circle looked a shade darker. My first thought was some kind of lens flare in my eyes, or maybe a migraine spot, except it didn't react when I blinked or moved my head. It moved on its own, heading toward the ridge. The air grew colder. Not freezing, just noticeably cooler than it should have been. I rubbed my arms and took a step backward without meaning to. As the distortion drifted farther, I heard a rustle behind me. I whipped around, expecting a deer or maybe another hiker, but nobody was there. Just trees. The sound had come from the left side of the trail, maybe 10 feet away, right around the level where the trunk started to thin out. I stared at that spot for a long time, waiting for something to move, but nothing did. When I turned back, the distortion in the sky was almost at the top of the ridge. It hovered for a moment, just stopped completely, and the air pressure feeling got slightly stronger. Not painful, just unnerving. Then the thing faded, not like it flew off, like it dissolved. 1 second it was there, the next the sky was normal again. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My heart was pounding. I felt stupid because I couldn't explain why I was so rattled. Nothing had touched me, nothing had made a sound. But the hair on my arm stayed standing up. I decided to keep moving, partly because standing still made me feel exposed. I listened hard as I walked, expecting to hear movement in the woods. Every time a twig snapped under my own boots, I flinched. After maybe half a mile, I reached the part of the trail where the trees open up to a small overlook. It's just a rocky shelf where you can see the highway in the distance. I stopped there, trying to shake the unease. The view looked normal. Cars, sunlight, distant traffic noise, all fine. But then something faint brushed my ears. Not exactly a sound, more like a hum too low to hear, but still noticeable. It made my teeth feel weird, like they were vibrating lightly. I turned in a slow circle, trying to figure out where it was coming from. It didn't feel like it came from any direction, just the air itself. I crouched and pressed my fingertips to the ground. It wasn't vibrating, it was just in the air. Right then, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I jumped. When I pulled it out, the screen flashed on, then off, then on again, but no notification popped up. The battery percentage dropped from 40% to 12% in a second. I stood there staring at that number, feeling this cold pull in my stomach. Before I could react, the hum stopped completely. The phone stabilized at 12%. The air warmed slightly. The normal forest sounds came back in gradually. The wind, the bugs, the distant highway. Everything felt like it had snapped back into place. I headed back down the trail fast, faster than I usually walk. The whole hike back, I kept checking the sky. It looked fine, but my eyes kept catching little flickers in my peripheral vision. I told myself it was just nerves. When I finally reached the parking lot, it was empty, except for my car and an older Subaru belonging to a guy I sometimes see on the trail. His name's Greg. He came out of the woods a minute after I arrived, waving like he always does. "You see that weird ring up there earlier?" he asked as he reached his car. My throat went dry. "What ring?" He pointed vaguely toward the ridge. "Up in the sky. Thought it was just my eyes being stupid, like heat waves, but not." I didn't know what to say. I just nodded, probably too slowly. Greg shrugged it off, told me to have a good night, and drove away. I sat in my car without starting it, gripping the steering wheel. It wasn't just me. Someone else saw something, but the ring of pressed leaves that I didn't mention. No point. When I finally started the engine, the radio came on even though I'd turned it off earlier. It was tuned to static. Not loud, but a soft hiss. I hit the power button and it didn't respond. After about 10 seconds, the static faded on its own and the radio shut off. The rest of the drive home was quiet. Too quiet. I kept watching the sky through my windshield, half expecting that circular blur to reappear. It didn't. I haven't gone back to Pine Wash since. I keep telling myself I will, that it's just a trail and nothing happened that actually harmed me. But every time I think about rounding that curve again and seeing that perfect ring on the ground, the back of my neck gets tight. And sometimes when I'm outside at dusk, I swear I see a brief smudge drift across the sky. Not always. Not enough to prove anything, but enough to make me look up and hold still until I'm sure the sky looks normal again. I was driving back from visiting my sister in La Push, taking that narrow 2-lane road that winds along the coast. It was close to midnight, fog rolling in so thick it felt like the ocean was quietly climbing up onto the land. I wasn't tired exactly, but it was the kind of drive where you start paying attention to every little noise in the car because there's nothing else to focus on. My GPS was mounted on the dash, glowing this soft blue. I remember checking it every few minutes just to reassure myself I hadn't missed a turn. Service out there drops in and out whenever it feels like it, so the map sometimes froze for a second before catching up. I was maybe 20 minutes south of Rialto Beach when the GPS froze again. I didn't think much of it until it updated, not to the road, but to open water. The icon for my car was sitting about half a mile offshore, like I was driving straight across the Pacific. I stared at it for a second, confused, thinking maybe it glitched and grabbed some old cached map. But the screen wasn't frozen anymore. The little arrow, that tiny blue triangle, was drifting farther out, inch by inch, as if the car was still in motion. I tapped the screen. Nothing. I closed the map and reopened it. Same thing. My car symbol was floating in the ocean, still creeping forward like it was following some invisible road under the waves. I slowed down, more out of instinct than anything else. The fog swallowed the headlights, making everything outside look like blank white paper. The only real sense of direction I had was the faint yellow line down the middle of the road. Then the GPS snapped back to normal. One blink, it was in the ocean. The next blink, it was right back on the winding stretch of Highway 110, exactly where I actually was. No lag, no buffering, just instantaneous correction. The map rotated sharply to realign itself, like it was embarrassed it had gotten lost. But when it corrected, something else happened. A faint, pale light appeared in the reflection across my windshield. I didn't see it in the sky directly, just in the glass, the way you sometimes catch a glimpse of a passing car's headlights behind you. Except there weren't any cars behind me. The road had been empty for at least 15 minutes. The light wasn't bright. It had this thin, washed-out color to it, almost like a flashlight beam filtered through milk. I looked up past the windshield to see it for real, but there was nothing there. Just fog and the vague dark shape of the treetops on my left. When I looked back at the windshield reflection, the light was still there. Very faint. Steady, like it was hovering somewhere above the car, but only visible as a reflection. My heart thudded harder than it needed to. I kept driving, slower now, maybe 30 miles an hour. The reflection didn't move much, just drifted slightly side to side in this way that didn't match the motion of my car. After maybe 10 seconds, it faded out. Not like it sped away, just like someone turned down the dimmer switch until it was gone. I stared at the sky for a long time after that, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. The fog made everything above me look flat and low, like a ceiling I could almost touch, but I didn't see any lights or shapes breaking through it. I kept going. I tried the radio, but it was nothing but static. Not even the faint kind where you can sometimes hear a distant station bleeding through. Just thick, empty static. About 5 minutes later, I heard a soft tapping. Not on the window, on the roof. It was gentle, almost uneven, like someone running their fingers along the top of the car. I turned off the radio to listen better, even though it was already static. Tap, tap, pause. Then 2 more taps faster together. I pulled over without thinking. My hands were sweating, and I could feel my pulse in my neck. I rolled the window down and stuck my head out. Nothing. No branches overhead, no cliffs, no loose pieces on the roof that might have been flapping. The fog pressed in thicker without the forward motion of the car. The air felt damp and heavy, like I'd stepped into a steam room. I kept listening for whatever had tapped, but the woods were dead quiet. Even the ocean, which I knew was somewhere to my right, sounded distant and faint. I decided to get out and check the roof. I opened the door slowly. The dome light flicked on, and the fog around me lit up like I was inside a glowing bubble. I reached up and ran my hand across the top of the car. It was warm. Not hot, not anything extreme, just warm in a way that didn't fit the night around me. The hood and the sides of the car were cold like normal metal would be at midnight in coastal fog. Only the roof had this lingering heat to it, almost like it had been under a lamp. I stood there for a second with my hand pressed against the metal, trying to decide if the warmth meant anything or if I was just worked up, but it didn't feel like I was imagining it. It was too distinct. Then I heard something up the road, a soft whooshing sound, like a strong gust of wind moving through leaves. Except the trees weren't moving. Their branches stayed completely still, silhouetted against the fog. The whooshing passed overhead, not around me. A brief swell of sound, maybe 2 seconds long. I didn't see anything, but the fog shifted, just barely, like something large had displaced the air above me. I got back in the car fast and locked the doors without meaning to. My breathing felt tight in my chest, controlled but shallow, and like I was trying not to make a sound. When I pulled back onto the road, my headlights flickered twice. They didn't go out, just dimmed and brightened again quickly, almost like they were reacting to something external rather than an electrical issue. I drove the rest of the way, barely blinking. The GPS didn't glitch again. The tapping didn't return. But the radio stayed static until I hit the outskirts of Forks, where it suddenly snapped back to a normal station mid-song. I got home around 1 a.m. and sat in my driveway for a solid minute before getting out. The roof of the car was cool by then. The next morning, I checked the GPS history. The entire stretch where it showed me drifting out to sea wasn't recorded. It jumped from one normal point on the road to the next, like the ocean detour never happened. I'm not a tech person, so maybe it was a software bug. Maybe the light on the windshield was just some weird reflection. Maybe the warmth was from the engine somehow, even though that didn't make sense physically. But sometimes, when I think about the way the fog shifted overhead, like something big and quiet moved just above me, I get that same tight feeling in my chest, and I still don't trust my GPS anywhere near the coast. I woke up because something in the house felt wrong. Not a sound, at least not at first. More like a vibration under the mattress, like someone had put a phone on silent mode and shoved it under the bed frame. It was just enough to pull me out of sleep. When I actually opened my eyes, I realized it wasn't the bed vibrating. It was the walls. A low humming, steady and smooth, not mechanical. It wasn't coming from the pipes or the vents. It was inside the drywall somehow, spreading through the room like a held note. I sat there for a few seconds, half awake and confused, trying to figure out if I had left something plugged in. The moment I pushed myself upright, the humming stopped. Not faded, stopped, like someone flipped a switch. I sat completely still, waiting for it to start again. Nothing. The house felt too quiet after that. No refrigerator hum, no furnace sound, not even the faint ticking of the baseboard heater. It was like the place was holding its breath. I got out of bed slowly and went to the window. I live in a small rental house just outside Marquette, up in northern Michigan. My bedroom faces the woods behind the property. Dense trees, no streetlights, nothing but darkness at night, unless the moon is bright. When I pulled the curtains back, the entire sky was glowing white. Not bright white, more like the color of a sheet held over a flashlight. A soft, even glow that had no direction, no source. The trees in the backyard were all silhouettes, sharp and perfectly still. I didn't see any flickering or clouds reflecting city light. It wasn't lightning either. It held steady for maybe 2 seconds. Then it vanished, just pure darkness again, like someone cut the power to the sky. I stood there for a long time, waiting for something else to happen, but everything stayed still. I didn't even hear wind. I ended up staring at my own reflection in the glass, trying to decide if I'd dreamed the whole thing. I checked the clock, 3:08 a.m. My phone said the same. Notifications were normal. Power was on. Everything looked totally ordinary, except for the feeling in my chest, like I was slightly off balance. I went to the kitchen to get water because my mouth felt dry. As soon as I stepped into the hall, the humming started again. Not the same intensity. This time it was softer, more diffused, like the noise was coming through the floor instead of the walls. It vibrated up through my legs and into my ribs, quiet enough that I wondered if I was imagining it, but strong enough to feel. I froze, listening. The sound didn't pulse or shift. It didn't get louder or quieter. It just existed. Constant and even, like an engine idling far underground. Then it cut off, again instantly. I took a few more steps, and it didn't start again. I grabbed a glass of water and stood by the sink. The backyard was completely black through the window. No porch light, no neighbors, no stars. The sky looked unusually empty. When I walked back toward the bedroom, I noticed something I hadn't before. The hallway seemed colder. Not window open cold, but a dry, thin cold that felt unnatural for a house heated by baseboards. Goosebumps rose on my arms, even though the thermostat was set to 69. I put my hand flat against the wall. It was vibrating. Very faintly, but unmistakable. I pulled my hand back and felt it without touching, just hovering a half-inch away. The air next to the wall felt almost electric. I stepped backward toward the living room. The vibration stopped. Then, from the bedroom, a soft thump, like someone lightly knocking on the inside of the wall. I nearly dropped the glass. My bedroom light was still off, but the door was open enough that I could see the faint outline of the bed, the dresser. Nothing moved. The sound didn't repeat. I stood there for probably 30 seconds, then forced myself to go back in and check. I turned on the light. Everything was exactly the same. No humming, no vibration, no glowing sky. I got back in bed eventually, but I didn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling and listened to the house settle like normal. It wasn't until around 4:30 that anything else happened. A soft click, like the sound a lamp makes when turning off, came from the corner of the room where the outlet is. Except the lamp wasn't even plugged in. I had unplugged it 2 days earlier to charge a vacuum. Right after the click, the humming returned. Not loudly. This time it was barely there, like a breath under the floorboards. My pillow seemed to pick it up, vibrating a little under my cheek. I sat up too fast and the humming cut off mid-note. The silence afterward felt even louder. That's when I noticed the trees outside were swaying even though there was no wind. Not a lot, just a subtle rocking motion, like something was pushing air through them. But the leaves weren't rustling. It was as if they were moving without making sound. I watched them for a long time. And then, for maybe a second or two, the sky brightened again. That faint white glow washed everything out. The branches, the yard, the edges of the window frame. My room filled with reflected light even though nothing inside was actually lit. Then it vanished again. I checked the clock, 4:42 a.m. No time jump, nothing strange there. I thought about calling someone, but who do you call for something like that? It wasn't an emergency, and I didn't even know if it was real. Around dawn, I finally fell asleep for a bit, maybe 2 hours. When I woke up, the house felt completely normal, warmer, noisier, alive in the usual way. Birds were making noise outside. A delivery truck rumbled past on the road. Whatever had happened during the night left no trace. No power fluctuations, no weird marks, no damage. Still, I walked around checking everything just to be sure. Walls felt normal. Floor felt normal. The trees looked fine. It was like nothing had happened. I tried to forget about it, or at least chalk it up to half dreaming. But the thing that keeps sticking with me is this. When I opened my phone that morning, the battery was down to 3%. It had been at 68 when I went to bed. There were no apps open, no background processes, no calls or messages. But when I tapped the battery usage chart, there was a huge unexplained drop right at 3 a.m. The graph just plunged straight down. No reason given. I've been charging it next to my bed for years, and it's never done that before. I haven't heard the humming since, and the sky hasn't glowed again. But sometimes late at night when the house gets very quiet, I catch myself listening, waiting for that low vibration to start up again behind the walls, just to know whether it was real. My dog, Luna, stopped so suddenly that the leash jerked tight in my hand. I thought she'd spotted a raccoon or heard another dog, but when I looked down, she wasn't pulling toward anything. She wasn't even sniffing. She just froze, rigid, ears up, tail straight, staring straight above us. We were on Miller Road, a quiet residential street on the edge of town. It was close to 10 p.m., one of those warm, overcast summer nights where everything feels a little dull and muted. Most houses were dark, except for a porch light here and there. I had earbuds in, a podcast playing low enough that I still caught the small noises around me. But when Luna stopped, I pulled one earbud out to see what she'd heard. There was nothing, just the faint hum of distant traffic and the soft clinking of her collar when she shifted a little. Then she whimpered. Not scared exactly, more like uncertain. She tilted her head up so far I thought she'd flip backwards. I followed her gaze. The clouds were thin enough that the moon showed through as this big, pale disk, not bright, just washed out. And right across the front of it, cutting a clean, smooth line, something drifted. My first thought was, cloud, obviously, but the shape didn't match. Clouds ripple and change and drag their edges behind them. This thing had a sharp outline. Hard to tell how big it was, but it felt close. Closer than a plane, much lower than a drone. No blinking lights, no sound. It floated in a straight, steady path, almost like it was gliding on rails. It moved slowly enough that I had time to process it. It wasn't a bird either. It didn't flap or shift. It didn't even sway. Just a smooth, dark oval sliding across the moon. I stood there staring until it slipped behind a thicker patch of cloud and disappeared. The whole thing lasted maybe 5 seconds. Luna's tail tucked between her legs, and she kept staring up even after it was gone. I waited another minute or so before tugging her along. She didn't resist, but she kept glancing over her shoulder, ears twitching. We kept walking, and I tried to convince myself I'd misinterpreted it. Maybe a low plane with weird lighting or some trick of the clouds. But every time I replayed it in my head, the movement didn't fit anything normal. We reached the corner where the street meets a small patch of woods. Not a real forest, just a strip of land between subdivisions, but dark enough to feel isolated. Luna slowed again. She sniffed the air, then leaned closer to the tree line, pulling hard on the leash. I didn't want to get too close, so I held her back. That's when I heard a noise. Not from the woods, from above. It sounded like a faint vibration. Not loud, but deep, like the hum you feel rather than hear. I checked my phone in case it was vibrating in my pocket, but the screen was dark. I held my breath and the hum continued, steady but soft like a distant generator in the sky. Luna pressed against my leg and whined. The hum rose slightly in pitch, then dropped back down. Not a siren, not a plane engine. It had no rhythm to it, more like air being pushed in a strange way. I couldn't see anything through the clouds, just that gray-white ceiling above the streetlights. But I kept catching small movements out of the corner of my eye. shifts in the cloud cover that didn't match the direction of the breeze. I told myself it was just paranoia, the mind filling in gaps. But then one of the streetlights flickered. Not a full power dip, just a single twitch of brightness, like something passed between it and the ground. Another light flickered farther down the road. I turned back the way we'd come. Something about the air felt a little warmer, like the temperature had risen by a few degrees without any wind or movement. Luna was practically glued to my leg now, tail still tucked. I started walking faster, not running, just trying not to look like I was hurrying. Luna matched my pace, trotting close, eyes darting upward every few seconds. I couldn't help doing the same. When we were about 3 houses from mine, the hum cut off completely. Not faded, cut off, like someone unplugged it. The sudden silence made my ears ring. For a moment, I wondered if I'd imagined the whole thing. But Luna stopped again and stared back toward the trees. The clouds shifted, and for a split second, I saw something glow faintly through them. A soft, white-blue blur. Not round like the moon, more like an elongated stripe of light. It pulsed once, very faintly, then dissolved back into the cloud cover. I couldn't tell how far away it was. Something about the brightness made it impossible to judge distance. It could have been huge and far, or small and close. It didn't cast light on the ground, didn't light the sky around it. It just existed inside the clouds for that one moment. I yanked on the leash a little too abruptly, and Luna flinched. I apologized under my breath and sped up again. My house came into view at the end of the block, porch light glowing yellow. I don't think I'd ever been relieved to see that boring little bulb before. As we reached the driveway, Luna let out a short bark, one sharp sound, then went silent. She looked up one last time. I followed her gaze. Nothing. Just clouds, drifting, the faintest hint of moon behind them. We stepped inside, and I closed the door faster than I meant to. I locked it, which I never do at that hour when I'm just taking her out for a quick loop. Luna went straight to her water bowl, but she kept pausing between sips to glance toward the window. Normally, after a walk that late, she'd curl up in her bed. Instead, she sat by my feet, alert, listening for something. I kept checking the windows like I was expecting another light to show up. It didn't. But when I took Luna out the next morning, she hesitated on the porch. She stared at the sky for a long moment before stepping off the last stair, and I did the same. I noticed the shadow first, not the darkness around it. I was driving home from my sister Erin's place, taking County Road 12 because the highway was closed for construction. It was close to 10 p.m., moonless, the kind of rural Colorado night where the dark feels heavier than the air. My headlights cut a narrow tunnel through it. Everything else swallowed up. About 10 minutes into the drive, the road straightened out into a long, empty stretch. I glanced at the asphalt ahead and saw my shadow stretching across it. Not a faint, soft-edged one like you sometimes get when the moon is low. This was solid, sharp, like high-beam headlights shining right behind my car. Except there were no cars behind me. I checked the rearview mirror, nothing but black. I flipped the mirror up and down a few times, convinced maybe it had gotten knocked out of alignment. But the reflection was the same, empty road. I eased my foot off the gas. The shadow stretched farther. It elongated across the asphalt, long enough to reach beyond the beam of my headlights, which shouldn't have been possible. Headlights don't make shadows in front of the car. Something behind me was lighting the road. I rolled the window down an inch. Cold air rushed in, smelling like dust and dry grass, but I didn't hear anything. No engine, no tires, no rushing air that would come with a tailgating truck. I slowed from 50 to 40. The shadow grew longer. I sped back up. The shadow shortened, but only a little. I turned my interior lights on for a second to steady myself, then turned them off again. When the darkness settled back into place, I felt like the world had narrowed, like my car existed in a pocket of space cut off from the rest. My hands felt slick on the steering wheel. 3 miles from the turnoff to my neighborhood, the shadow started shifting. It leaned slightly left, then centered itself again, then right. Not wildly, just drifting like something behind me was moving back and forth, but there was still nothing back there. My mirror insisted on that. The road dipped gently, and for a moment the shadow slid up over the small hill ahead before I reached it, stretched thin and distorted like someone had grabbed its edges and pulled. I flicked my high beams on and off. No change. At the next slight curve, I decided to test it. I switched lanes, drifting to the left side of the empty two-lane road. My shadow followed my movement perfectly, like it was locked to the center of my car. I whispered, "Okay, okay," just to hear another voice. The shadow wasn't just mine, though. Not exactly. My outline was there, head, shoulders, shape of the car, but something at the back end of it didn't match. A faint bulge near the trunk line. A distortion. Like the shadow of something hovering just above and behind me, too faint to define but too solid to ignore. I pushed the gas to 60. The shadow didn't fall behind. It stayed exactly where it was, stretched long and wrong across the road ahead. My chest tightened. I kept checking the mirror, even though the view didn't change. Pure blackness. No headlights, no car silhouette, nothing. The road climbed slightly, and when I reached the top, I saw another stretch of asphalt spill out in front of me, a long, straight section with no trees or anything to break the line. My shadow reached the end of that section. Then it seemed to bend upward slightly, like the road itself was tilting even though I knew it was flat. A low vibration hummed through the car, not through the engine, not through the radio, but through the air itself. My ears felt full, pressurized, like driving into higher altitude too quickly. I tapped my ear. It didn't pop. The hum grew stronger for a moment. My rearview mirror vibrated faintly. Then the road behind me lit up. Not with headlights. It wasn't warm light. It was cold, pale, almost bluish, though it didn't illuminate anything except the far edges of the mirror. The road surface behind my car glowed faintly, but not the fences or fields beside it, just the asphalt like it was reacting instead of being lit. The shadow ahead snapped sharper, like someone had increased the contrast. I felt the urge to slam on the brakes. I didn't. I kept a steady 55, hands locked on the wheel. Then the hum cut out. Instantly. Not fading, just gone. And so was the glow behind me. My shadow shrank fast, pulling back toward the front of my car, like an elastic band snapping back into shape. Within a second or two, it looked normal, dim, soft-edged, barely visible. I exhaled shakily, but I didn't relax. Something still felt off. Half a mile later, my headlights flickered. Just a blink. Maybe half a second. I lifted my foot off the gas. The headlights flickered again, this time longer. And in that brief dimness, the world outside seemed too still, like every sound had been sucked out of the air. When the lights brightened again, I saw something ahead, just for a flash. Not the shadow this time, something above the road. A darker patch of darkness, moving upward. Like something had been riding just above my car and was now rising straight into the sky. I craned my neck to follow it, but it blended too quickly into the night. The stars wavered slightly where it disappeared, like ripples across water. When I pulled onto my street, the world returned to its normal suburban quiet. Porch lights glowing, sprinklers ticking on timers, and occasional television flickering behind living room curtains. I parked in my driveway and sat there for a long minute, gripping the steering wheel, waiting for the hum, or the vibration, or the glow to return. Nothing did. But when I finally got out and shut the door, I noticed something on the road beside my car. A narrow strip of asphalt, just a few feet long, looked lighter than the rest, as if something bright had hovered close to it recently. Not burned, not melted, just faintly bleached, like the pavement had been exposed to light in a way it wasn't built for. I crouched and touched it. Warm. Just barely, but unmistakably warm. The rest of the asphalt was cold. I stood up fast. Inside the house, my shadow looked normal under the hallway light, but when I walked into my bedroom and turned off the lamp, I froze. For a second. Just a second. My silhouette on the opposite wall stretched longer than it should have. Not much. Maybe a foot. Maybe two. Then it snapped back as if nothing had happened. I didn't sleep for a while. Since then, every time I drive that stretch of County Road 12, I keep checking the mirror, scrolling the darkness behind me for any sign of pale light. And whenever my headlights catch my shadow ahead, even in the most normal way, I brace myself, expecting it to stretch into that impossible shape again, pulled by something I never heard, never saw, but somehow know was there. I heard the chirping on a Thursday night, sometime after 9 p.m., while I was sitting on the back patio with a beer. It had been a long day, and the temperature had finally dropped enough that the air felt reasonable again. One of those warm Colorado summer nights where the breeze is barely there, just enough to move the wind chimes now and then. I usually sat outside for a bit before bed to decompress. That night felt normal at first. The sound came while I was halfway through my drink, soft, rhythmic, and too regular to be an insect. It wasn't a bird either. Birds don't chirp like that at night, and they definitely don't chirp in perfect pulses. It was faint, almost shy, but still distinct enough that I heard it over the hum of the swamp cooler through the screen door. Chirp, 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 about one per second. Clean. Mechanical, almost. I tilted my head a little, listening harder. It seemed to be coming from above, not from the yard, not the roof, higher than that. When I looked up, the sound stopped immediately, like someone hit pause. The sky was clear, typical dry summer night. Stars everywhere, the Milky Way a faint smear overhead. Nothing moved, no planes, no satellites, no clouds, just black sky and cold pinpoints of light. I waited a few seconds, still staring upward. Nothing. When I finally looked back down at my beer, the chirping returned. Same rhythm. Same pitch, almost exactly where it had been before. I looked up again. It stopped. I tested it a few times, trying not to freak myself out. Look down. Chirp. Look up. Silence. Look down. Chirp. Up. Silence. It was too consistent to be a coincidence. Eventually, I kept my head angled downward, but shifted my eyes upward without moving too much. The chirping faltered, not a full stop, but a stutter, like it was reacting to my attention, even if I wasn't fully looking at it. When I lifted my chin by even an inch, the sound cut off. That was when my skin prickled. Not fear at first, just confusion that made me suddenly aware of how alone I was outside. I stood up slowly, trying not to crunch the gravel too loudly. I walked out into the middle of the yard where the patio light didn't reach as well. My eyes adjusted to the dark. The chirping didn't return yet. I waited. 5 seconds. 10. Then, chirp, chirp, chirp. I didn't look up this time. I kept my eyes level with the fence. The sound seemed to be coming from maybe 40 or 50 feet above me. Too high for a bug on the roof, too low for a plane, too steady for anything I could explain. It wasn't echoing off the houses. It didn't sound like something far away. It was overhead, directly. I took another step into the grass. The pulsing got slightly louder. Not by much, but enough that I could tell I'd moved closer to it. I finally whispered, "What is that?" Because hearing my own voice grounded me a little. The sound stopped again. Not faded. Stopped. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears then. The neighborhood around me was dead quiet. No dogs barking, no cars on the main road a block over, not even crickets. It was so still that it felt like the entire world was holding its breath. I backed up until I felt the patio concrete under my feet again. When I reached my chair, I sat down, gripping the armrests. Chirp. I jumped slightly at how sudden it was. Chirp, chirp. I stared straight ahead, letting my eyes relax, letting my peripheral vision widen. Sometimes you can catch movement that way better than looking straight at something. For a second, just a second, I thought I saw something darker than the sky shift above me. Not a shape, more like a patch where the stars didn't match up, like one or two of them were slightly displaced. I blinked hard. The patch was gone. The chirping continued. I tried to see if the sound had a direction. I rotated my head a little. It stayed above. I crouched down. It stayed above. I leaned back in my chair and stared at my knees. Louder. I exhaled shakily and put the beer on the ground. My hands were trembling now, and I didn't want to spill it. I forced myself to stand again and walk to the far end of the yard, near the fence. The chirping stayed with me. Not directly overhead every step, but shifting just slightly to stay aligned above me. Like it was tracking me, not from a distance, but from a fixed height, straight up. At one point, the chirping paused, and the silence got so deep, it almost rang in my ears. Then a softer, lower pulse joined it, like a second voice humming from above, slower and stretched out. I looked up without thinking. Silence again. I couldn't see anything. My eyes darted from cluster to cluster of stars, searching for any sign, motion, shape, anything. Nothing. I backed away from the fence and started walking toward the house. I didn't run, but I didn't stroll either. The chirping picked up again when my gaze dropped. Shorter intervals now. Chirp, 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 chirp. It reminded me of sonar pings. When I reached the porch, I hesitated. The porch light created a cone of brightness that felt suddenly unsafe. like stepping into it would make me visible in a way I didn't want to be. But the dark yard felt worse. I stepped into the light anyway. The chirping slowed. I placed my hand on the doorknob. The chirping stopped. I waited. After 5 long seconds, a single chirp sounded. Loudest yet. Not painfully loud, but sharp. Intentional. I turned the knob quickly and slipped inside, shutting the door behind me. I locked it without thinking and stood in the entryway with the lights off, listening. Nothing. Not even the refrigerator hum. I cracked the blinds just a sliver and peeked outside. The yard looked normal again. Streetlight down the block flickered faintly like always. Nothing overhead. No movement. I watched for 2 full minutes, hardly breathing. Still nothing. When I finally flicked on a lamp, the normal house sounds returned. The fridge humming, the swamp cooler rumbling, the faint chirp of a smoke detector battery dying somewhere down the street. I sat on the couch and stayed there until almost midnight, too keyed up to move, staring at the back door as though it might open on its own. Eventually, exhaustion won. When I went to bed, I left the blinds closed and the lamp on low. Just before I drifted off, I heard one faint chirp from outside. Not overhead, off to the right, east of the house. Distant, almost shy. Like whatever it was had drifted away but hadn't gone far. I didn't get up. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, imagining the sky above the neighborhood light, wondering if something was passing over the houses the same way it had passed over mine. Pausing each time someone looked up, pulsing softly in the dark, continuing only when no one was paying direct attention. For days afterward, every time I sat outside, I caught myself listening hard for that pulsing sound. Some nights I heard normal noises, wind, insects, cars on the road. Other nights, the silence got thick again, too evenly quiet, and I'd go back inside after a few minutes, so it had heart picking up speed. I haven't heard the chirping again the way I did that first night. Not clearly, not close, but every once in a while, right as I'm looking away from the stars, I think I hear the beginning of it, just one pulse. Before the night swallows it, like something paused again mid-motion, waiting for me to look up so it could disappear. I noticed the lights starting to act strange halfway down Alder Street, right after I passed the little corner market that always smelled like old coffee and floor cleaner. It was around 10:45 p.m. early fall, one of those nights where the air feels cool but not cold, and everything has that damp, quiet heaviness. I'd stayed late at my friend Matt's place helping him move furniture around his apartment, and I didn't feel like waiting 40 minutes for the bus, so I decided to walk the 20 minutes back to my place. Alder was usually well lit, old metal street lamps every 30 yards or so, buzzing faintly, the kind of orange glow that made everything look slightly washed out. That night, though, the far end of the block looked dimmer than usual. I thought maybe a bulb was out. It wasn't until I got closer that I realized it wasn't one bulb. It was all of them, going dark one by one. The lamp closest to me was on. The next one flickered, then went black. 2 seconds later, the next one flickered. Then, black. Like dominoes. I slowed down. There was no power outage. The houses on either side of the street still had porch lights on, TVs flickering behind curtains. Just the street lamps were shutting off, and they were doing it in a perfect sequence down the block. I stopped walking entirely when the 5th light blinked out. The darkness was creeping toward me like a curtain being pulled shut. I waited for the lamps behind me, the ones closer to the market, to go out too, but they stayed steady, buzzing normally. Only the ones ahead were failing. I told myself it was probably a wiring issue. Something underground. A breaker tripping. The stupid explanations your brain reaches for, even when they don't fit what you're seeing. The 6th lamp flickered hard enough that the bulb inside rattled, then died. There were 2 more between me and the big intersection at Cedar Avenue. I could still see some light from the intersection spill into the dark stretch, but it wasn't enough to make me feel better. I checked my phone out of habit. No bars, not unusual for that area, but it made me feel more alone than I should have. I debated turning around and going back to Matt's instead of continuing, but the idea of walking back past all the houses with dark front yards somehow felt worse. At least the intersection ahead had traffic lights and usually a few cars passing. The 7th lamp died. I took a slow step backward. My heel scraped the pavement louder than it should have. I kept staring into the dark ahead, expecting to see someone. Maybe a city worker in a bucket truck or kids messing with the breaker box. But there was nobody. Just the empty street. The eighth lamp, the one closest to me, flickered wildly, like the bulb was being shaken inside the casing, then blinked out. That left me standing right at the edge of a long, perfect stretch of darkness. The whole block ahead was black now. Not dim, black. Like the light from the intersection couldn't penetrate it fully. My eyes should have adjusted, but they didn't. The dark felt thick. That's when I heard the faint shimmer. Shimmer isn't the right word, but I can't think of a better one. It wasn't a hum or a buzz or a whistle. It was like tiny pieces of glass brushing together, soft, high-pitched, almost delicate. And it came from above me. I tilted my head back slowly. There was nothing in the sky, no plane, no drone, no bird, just a faint blur passing across the stars, as if someone dragged translucent cloth overhead. It didn't block the stars exactly. It warped them, bent them slightly, like heat haze at night, but colder somehow. The shimmer passed directly over me, and all 8 streetlights flickered back to life at the same moment. The sudden brightness made me flinch. The lamps buzzed harder than usual, like they were waking up from sleep. For a few seconds, the entire block looked too bright, as if the bulbs were running beyond their normal power. The shimmering sound faded as whatever that was moved farther down the road. The blur above me drifted towards Cedar Avenue, distorting the sky as it went. When it reached the intersection, the traffic lights turned yellow. Not blinking, solid yellow. All 4 directions. Cars slowed awkwardly, unsure what to do. I watched one driver roll down his window like he was about to shout at someone. The blur hovered briefly above the crossing, or maybe it just moved slower there, and then continued east toward the river. As soon as it left the intersection, the traffic lights snapped back to normal red-green patterns. The street lamps behind it flickered again, but stayed on this time. I stood frozen for a while, unsure whether to keep walking or just go back to Matt's and make up some excuse to crash on his couch. Eventually, I forced myself forward, partly because standing alone under those lights felt worse than walking. I kept glancing up, even though the blur was gone from sight. Every time I passed under a lamp, I listened for the shimmer, but the only things I heard were distant cars and the rustle of leaves. When I reached the intersection, a man in a red hoodie was standing on the corner smoking. He kept looking up too, the same way I probably had been. When I passed, he said, "Did you see that?" I didn't answer. I didn't want to talk about it, not with a stranger. I crossed Cedar and continued toward my apartment. The closer I got to home, the more normal everything seemed. Dogs barking behind fences, a porch light flickering because someone hadn't replaced the bulb, the distant sound of a train. But every time I stepped under a street lamp, I waited for it to die. 3 blocks from home, the streetlights stayed steady, but the air changed again. The temperature dropped fast, like stepping into an air-conditioned room. I rubbed my arms, confused. I could see my breath for maybe 3 seconds before the air warmed back up, as if whatever passed overhead had left a cold trail hanging behind. I didn't hear the shimmer again, but the sudden cold felt like the same thing, just quieter. When I finally reached my building, I practically jogged up the stairs. My hands shook a little when I unlocked the door. Inside, the apartment felt too normal. My kitchen light humming its usual hum, the clock on the stove blinking 10:56 like nothing had happened. I stood by the window for a long time, watching the street. Nothing strange happened. No darkened lamps, no shimmering sky, no warped stars. Around midnight, I heard something faint outside. Not the shimmer, just a soft click as the streetlight in front of my building turned off for its scheduled cycle. It startled me anyway. I didn't sleep much. The next morning, I walked the exact same route to see if anything looked weird in daylight. Everything looked exactly as it should. The lamps intact, the intersection normal, the air a mild fall temperature. But halfway down Alder, where the last lamp had gone dark the night before, I found a patch of asphalt that looked polished. That's the only word I could think of. Not wet, not scraped. Polished. A smooth circle about 2 feet wide, like something had hovered just above it long enough to burnish the pavement. No one else seemed to notice it. Some days I walk through that block without thinking about it. Other days, especially when the air gets oddly still or when the lamps buzz a little louder than usual, I catch myself looking up, waiting for the sky to bend again, waiting for that faint shimmer to announce something drifting just overhead, invisible except for the way it snuffs out the light as it passes. My smartwatch vibrated for the third time before I even made it to the end of my street. At first, I assumed it was just some glitch. Maybe I'd forgotten to clear a notification or the haptics were acting up again. It had done weird things before after getting splashed during a run, so didn't think much of it. But when I lifted my wrist, the screen was blank. No messages, no reminders, no health alerts, just the time glowing at me like nothing was wrong. I shook my wrist a little and kept walking. The vibration stopped for about 10 seconds. Then it buzzed again. 2 short taps against my skin, the exact pattern it used for incoming texts. I sighed and muttered to myself, "Come on, don't die on me now," and raised my wrist again. Still nothing on the display. It was just after 9 p.m. on a Tuesday, dry, cool, early fall. I was walking back from my friend Andrea's place a few blocks over. She'd asked me to help her move a bookshelf down a flight of stairs, which turned into helping her rearrange half her living room. I was tired, and I just wanted to get home, microwave leftover pasta, and zone out in front of a show. My neighborhood was quiet, suburban, but older. Large maple trees, uneven sidewalks, houses set back behind hedges and low fences. A few porch lights were on, but most places were dark. The sky was clear, except for a thin scatter of clouds drifting toward the horizon. Good visibility. The kind of night when you could see every star that wasn't drowned out by street lamps. My watch buzzed again. Harder this time. Longer vibration, like an alarm. I stopped under a corner streetlight and swiped the screen. Nothing. I held down the button to check for system errors. Still nothing. The watch was acting like it was perfectly normal, but also like it was desperately trying to get my attention. That was the first moment I felt uneasy. The second happened a few seconds later when I noticed the speck of light above the street. I don't know how long it had been there before I noticed it. It wasn't bright, not like a plane or a drone or even a satellite, just a faint, dim point, no bigger than a star. But it was low, much too low to be anything astronomical. My first thought was that it was the tip of a radio tower, but there were no towers anywhere near that part of town, and it was sitting perfectly still above the intersection ahead of me, not blinking, not moving, just hanging there. My watch buzzed twice. I looked from the watch to the light, from the light back to the watch. My heartbeat picked up in this uncomfortable, crawling way. I couldn't shake the feeling the two things were connected. Not in any logical sense, but in the way you just know something's wrong before you have proof. I took a few slow steps forward. The light didn't shift. It didn't flicker. It didn't react at all. But my watch buzzed again. 3 sharp pulses. Not any pattern I recognized. I turned in a slow circle, checking for headlights, security lights, electrical transformers, anything that might be throwing some kind of reflection. There was nothing unusual. Just empty street, evenly spaced lamps, silent houses. No movement except the slight rustling of leaves overhead. I thought about calling Andrea, but I felt silly. What would I even say? Hey, my watch is spazzing out and there's a dot in the sky? No way. Instead, I kept walking. Every few seconds, my watch vibrated. Some pulses were short, some long, some felt almost hesitant. It reminded me of someone tapping their finger on a desk while deciding whether to speak. When I reached the intersection, the speck of light hung right above the 4-way stop. Maybe 100 feet up, maybe less. It wasn't bright enough to illuminate anything below it. The pavement looked exactly as it always did. Smooth patches, cracked patches, a faded crosswalk symbol. Nothing unusual. But the light looked close. Closer than any star had a right to be. My watch buzzed so hard it startled me. I flinched and almost dropped my arm. This time, when I checked the screen, it was glowing white. Just a blank white screen, no icons, no numbers, no backlight bleed, perfectly uniform. I tapped it, swiped, held the button, nothing changed. And the light above me dimmed. Not all at once, more like a slow fade as if someone was turning a knob. I stepped back instinctively, expecting it to blink out or drop lower or reveal some shape around it. Instead, it hovered there, barely visible, then brightened again, back to its original faint glow. My throat tightened. I realized I'd been holding my breath. I forced myself to look away from the light and check around the intersection again. No cars, no people, not even a stray cat or cyclist. Just a quiet residential street and that point of dim illumination hanging above it. My watch buzzed in one long, continuous vibration. I lifted it toward my face and the buzzing stopped instantly. The screen stayed white. Then very slowly it faded back to the regular time display. 9:14 p.m. Like nothing had happened. I didn't move for a long moment. Just listened. Waited. My watch stayed quiet. I forced myself to walk. Not fast, but steady. One foot after the other. I kept my peripheral vision locked on the light, trying not to look directly at it, but needing to know if it moved. It stayed overhead. I rounded the corner onto my street. The light drifted slightly, not downward, not sideways exactly, more like it repositioned itself to stay aligned with me. The movement was so smooth I almost doubted I saw it, like a trick of my eyes. My watch buzzed once. Short, sharp. I broke into a faster walk. Halfway down my block, the light finally moved. It rose, straight upward. Not fast, just steadily climbing through the air. The higher it got, the dimmer it looked, until it was impossible to tell whether it had disappeared or simply blended in with the stars. By the time I reached my driveway, it was gone. My watch didn't vibrate again for the rest of the night. Inside my house, I sat on the couch with the watch off my wrist, set on the coffee table like it might do something if I looked away. It didn't. It stayed on, functioning normally. I restarted it twice, no glitches, no phantom notifications. Later, when I lay in bed, I replayed the walk over and over, trying to rationalize the whole thing. Maybe it really was a drone, one with a very weak light and a completely silent motor, or a satellite caught at a strange angle, or some atmospheric trick, and the buzzing was a coincidence or an electrical issue. Those explanations should have made me feel better. They didn't, because sometimes when I'm halfway to work or the grocery store or Andrea's house, the watch gives one single, unprompted buzz. Just one. And every instinct I have makes me check the sky. I found out the next morning when Mark asked me if I was feeling okay. He caught me as I was getting into my car for work. He lives 2 houses down, close enough that we wave at each other, but not close enough that we usually talk before coffee. "Hey," he said, squinting like he was trying to decide how to phrase something. "You all right last night?" I laughed a little. "Yeah? Why?" He hesitated. "I don't want to sound weird, but you were standing in your yard around midnight, just standing there." I stared at him. "No, I wasn't." "You were," he said quickly. "I was letting the dog out. You were barefoot in that gray hoodie you always wear, just looking up. I felt that cold, hollow feeling start in my stomach. I was asleep." He shrugged, uncomfortable now. "I figured you might have been sleepwalking or something. You didn't move the whole time I was out there. I said your name once. You didn't react." "How long was I out there?" I asked. "I don't know, a couple minutes maybe. I went back inside because my dog was losing his mind." I forced a smile, told him it was probably nothing. Maybe I'd stepped out for air and forgot. He nodded, relieved to drop it, and went back inside. I got in my car and sat there with the door open, trying to slow my breathing. I lived alone. I didn't sleepwalk. I had never, ever gone outside in the middle of the night without remembering it. At work, I checked my phone. At 12:17 a.m., there was a location ping from my phone's history. Not a step count, not an app, just a dot on the map sitting exactly in the middle of my front yard. It stayed there until 12:29. 12 minutes. I stared at the screen until my eyes hurt. I checked my sleep tracker next. It showed uninterrupted sleep from 11:03 p.m. to 6:41 a.m. No wake events, no spikes. According to the data, I never left the bed. I tried to tell myself the GPS had glitched, that the ping was wrong, that Mark had mistaken someone else for me, but he'd known what I was wearing. That night, I didn't sleep much. Every small sound made me tense. I kept checking the time, then checking my bedroom door to make sure it was still locked. Around midnight, I sat up in bed and listened, half expecting to hear my own footsteps somewhere in the house. Nothing happened. The next morning, I felt stupid for being scared. I was exhausted, irritable. I almost deleted the location data. Instead, I took screenshots. Over the next week, nothing unusual happened. No more pings, no strange dreams, no neighbors asking questions. I started to relax just a little. Then on Thursday, my phone buzzed at 12:17 a.m. I was awake this time. I was lying on my side, scrolling through nothing in particular, when the vibration hit. One short buzz, like a notification that didn't quite come through. I unlocked my phone immediately. No alerts. I checked the clock, 12:18. My heart started to race. I stayed in bed, barely breathing, staring at the door. I told myself that if I didn't move, whatever had happened before couldn't happen again. At 12:29, my phone buzzed again. Same short vibration. I opened my location history with shaking fingers. Another ping. Same spot. Front yard. According to my phone, I'd been standing outside again. I didn't sleep at all after that. The next day, I installed a camera in my living room and one pointing at the front door. I set motion alerts. I even put a chair under the doorknob like I was a kid afraid of burglars. That night, at 12:16, my phone buzzed. I watched the camera feed on my screen. Nothing moved. At 12:17, the front door camera flickered, just for a fraction of a second. The feed went white, then returned to normal. No motion alert triggered. At 12:29, my phone buzzed again. I felt sick. The next morning, the camera logs showed no recorded movement, no door opening, no person entering or leaving. But the exterior camera had something else. At exactly 12:17 a.m., there was a single frame where the entire image was washed out like it had been overexposed. The house across the street disappeared into white. The sky looked flat and pale with no stars. One frame. Then normal again. I took the day off work. That afternoon, I walked my yard, looking for footprints or disturbed grass. There was nothing. The ground was dry and undisturbed. I stood where the ping said I'd been, right between the maple tree and the walkway. From there, I could see a wide stretch of sky above the neighborhood, unobstructed by trees or power lines. That night, I didn't stay in bed. I sat on the couch with the lights on, phone in hand, camera feed open. Midnight came and went without incident. I started to relax. At 12:16, every hair on my arm stood up. I didn't hear anything. I felt it, a subtle pressure, like a change in altitude. The room felt too quiet, like sound had been turned down slightly. My phone buzzed. 12:17. I was still on the couch. I hadn't moved. I checked the cameras. The front yard camera showed me standing there. I dropped the phone. I watched myself on the screen, barefoot, hoodie pulled tight, arms hanging at my sides. My head was tilted back, staring straight up. I wasn't blinking. The image was grainy, dark, but clear enough that there was no doubt it was me. The timestamp ticked forward. The version of me in the yard didn't move. Not even when a car passed and headlights washed over the lawn. The light bent around me strangely, like I was slightly out of focus. I picked the phone back up, hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it again. The sky above my double looked wrong. Not dark, not starry, just dim, like something was blocking the depth of it. I forced myself to stand up. The moment I did, the camera feed glitched. The image smeared sideways for a split second. Then the yard was empty. My phone buzzed. 12:29. I didn't go outside, I didn't sleep. I sat there until sunrise with every light in the house on, watching the cameras like they might suddenly show me standing somewhere else. The next day, Mark didn't go to work. There was a police car in front of his house in the afternoon. I found out later that evening when his sister knocked on my door. They'd found him in his backyard that morning, barefoot, lying on his back in the grass. He was alive, conscious, but he couldn't explain why he was there. His phone showed a location ping at 12:17 a.m., same 12-minute gap. He didn't remember standing outside. He didn't remember seeing anything. He only remembered lying in bed and then waking up cold. I unplugged the cameras that night, turned my phone off completely, pulled the SIM card out and left it in the kitchen. It didn't matter. At 12:17, I woke up standing in my yard. I knew it before I opened my eyes. I could feel the damp grass under my feet, the night air against my skin, that pressure in my chest, steady and calm, like something heavy resting just above me. I opened my eyes. The sky wasn't dark. It wasn't bright either. It was a uniform, pale gray, stretching endlessly in every direction. No stars, no clouds, just depthless color. I didn't see anything else. No shapes, no lights, nothing to focus on. I had the overwhelming sense that I was being observed, not by something nearby, but by something vast and distant, like the sky itself was aware of me. I wanted to look away. I couldn't. When I woke up in my bed, it was morning. My phone was back on my nightstand, powered on, alarms intact. The location history showed another ping. I moved 2 weeks later. New house, new neighborhood. I don't talk to my neighbors. I don't go outside at night anymore. But sometimes, when I wake up just before dawn, my chest feels heavy, and the sky outside my window looks a little too pale. And I check the time. It's always close to 12:17.